10 Things People Regret After Losing You. You think that title is for them, don't you? Like, it's some little trophy you get to hold up in the mirror so you can admire the bruises you survived. So you can say, look, I was worth something after all. Look how they miss me now. Look how their hands shake when my name crawls into their throat. And I can see it, that tiny, almost embarrassing hope hiding behind your eyes. The one you pretend you don't have because you've been disappointed too many times to admit you still want to be chosen, still want to be seen, still want someone to stand up and say, I was wrong to treat you like a spare part in my life. You wear that hope like a bandage over a wound that never closes, and you call it dignity. You call it being over it. You call it moving on. But I know the truth. I know the little ritual you do when you're alone, replaying moments like their security footage, slowing them down, zooming in on the exact second someone looked away when you needed them to look closer, pausing on the exact second your mouth opened and then closed again because you decided your pain was too inconvenient to share, too messy, too likely to get you laughed at or ignored. You learn to swallow words until they turned into stones, and you tell yourself it's strength, but it's really training, the kind that teaches you how to disappear while still standing in the room, smiling like everything is fine while you quietly negotiate with your own heart not to crack in public. And the funny part is, people loved you best when you were shrinking, didn't they? When you were easy, when you were useful, when you made your suffering small enough to fit in their schedule, when you apologized for needing anything at all, when you said, it's okay, even when it wasn't, especially when it wasn't. And then one day you stopped offering yourself like free water to people who never learned to say thank you, and suddenly they called you cold, suddenly they called you changed, suddenly they acted like you were the problem because you stopped bleeding where they could drink. That's where the regrets start. Not the dramatic kind they post about, not the fake poetry, not the big speeches people give to look deep, but the private regrets, the ones that pinch them at 2:17 in the morning when the room is too quiet and there's no audience to perform for. They regret underestimating how heavy your absence would feel, because they thought you were permanent, like a wall in a house they could lean on forever, without ever asking if your foundation was cracking. They regret the way they treated your kindness like a service they were entitled to, like you were built to absorb their moods, their stress, their boredom, their loneliness, like you were a soft place to land that never needed rest. They regret the jokes they made when you were already bruised, the little humiliations they hid inside just playing, because deep down they knew you laughed along to survive, not because it was funny. They regret the times you asked for something simple, time, honesty, effort, and they acted like you were asking for their lungs, like you were demanding too much, like your needs were a personal attack. They regret ignoring the warning signs, the quiet ones, the way your energy changed, the way your replies got shorter, the way your eyes stopped begging, because you finally accepted what they kept proving. They regret not defending you when other people turned you into a story, a rumor, a punchline, because staying silent was easier than standing with you, and they chose easy. They regret choosing pride over apology, because they thought you'd come back anyway. They thought your forgiveness was automatic, like a subscription they could cancel and restart whenever they felt like it. They regret the way they kept you as an option instead of a priority, how they fed you crumbs and watched you pretend it was a meal. They regret waiting too long to reach out, because they believed time would pause for them, because they thought you would stay in that same emotional position, frozen, available, loyal, bruised, but obedient. And they regret realizing the final truth too late, that the version of you they miss is the version they helped destroy, and the person you became after surviving them is not someone they can access with a casual, hey, and a smiling emoji. emoji. They regret losing you because they finally understand you were the rare kind of person who stayed even while you were hurting. And when you finally left, even if you stayed physically but left emotionally, it exposed how empty their world really was. And you sit there and act like you're above it, like you don't care, like you're just numb. But you still count those regrets like coins, don't you? Still wonder if any of them are real. Still wonder if any of them mean you mattered. Still wonder if the pain was at least useful as evidence that you were not invisible. And that's where I lean in and smile. Because your biggest weakness isn't that you loved too much. It's that you keep looking for proof you were lovable from people who benefited most when you doubted it. And you call that hope, faith in people? But it's really hunger. It's thirst. It's the kind of loneliness that makes you accept a glass of dirty water because you're scared there won't be anything else to drink. You want a psychological autopsy? Fine. Let's peel you open without making it pretty. You didn't just get hurt. You got trained. You got trained by small rejections that happen so often you stopped calling them rejections and started calling them normal. You got trained by being the one who reaches out first, the one who checks in, the one who smooths things over, the one who says, "It's fine, I understand," while your own chest is begging you not to understand anymore. You got trained by the way people's attention came with conditions. The way love felt like a performance review. The way affection showed up when you were entertaining, helpful, agreeable, and vanished when you were human. So you built a version of yourself that could survive that climate. A version that anticipates, that overthinks, that apologizes early, that offers extra, that tries to pay for love in advance. Like a person slipping cash into a stranger's hand just to be allowed to sit near the warmth. And the cruelest part is you're smart enough to know what you're doing, but not disciplined enough to stop doing it when the hunger hits. You tell yourself you're patient. Really, you're afraid. You tell yourself you're understanding. Really, you're tolerating. You tell yourself you're loyal. Really, you're attached to the idea that if you just endure long enough, someone will finally notice the cost. You learned to make yourself smaller because you thought it would make you easier to keep. You learned to laugh at what hurt you because you thought it would make you safer. You learned to say, "No problem," with a smile because you thought it would make you lovable. And then you got angry at yourself for feeling empty, as if emptiness was a moral failure instead of the predictable result of pouring and pouring and pouring into hands that never learned how to hold. Listen to me closely, because this is where people like you get confused. You think the worst thing that happened to you was being abandoned or betrayed or ignored. That's painful, sure. But the worst thing that happened to you was the quiet deal you made with yourself afterward. The deal where you said, "I will not ask for what I need if it risks losing someone." The deal where you said, "I will accept half love if it keeps the room from going silent." The deal where you said, "I will become low maintenance so nobody has an excuse to leave." That deal is what killed your voice, and your voice is where your power lives. You've been living like a person who thinks love is scarce and must be earned through suffering. You've been living like your worth is a debate and other people get the final vote. And because you live like that, you keep ending up around people who love debates, people who like having the upper hand, people who enjoy the subtle control of watching you chase their approval. They don't always look evil. Sometimes they look charming. Sometimes they look wounded. Sometimes they look like they need you, and that's what hooks you. Because you confuse being needed with being valued. You confuse intensity with intimacy. You confuse attention with love. You confuse someone's crisis with your calling. And when you finally crack, when you finally show the parts of you that are tired, the parts that are angry, the parts that are done, they act shocked. Like you betrayed the contract. Like you were supposed to be the strong one forever. Like you were supposed to be their shelter without ever needing shelter yourself. That's when they begin rewriting the story. That's when your kindness becomes manipulation in their mouths. Your boundaries become attitude. Your silence becomes punishment. Your pain becomes drama. And you, this is the part that makes me tilt my head and study you like a puzzle. Sometimes you believe them. You take their version of you and you wear it like a sentence. You stand in front of your own reflection and you cross-examine yourself. Maybe I am too much. Maybe I am too sensitive. Maybe I deserve this. Maybe if I was better, they would have stayed. That's not humility. That's self-betrayal dressed up as accountability. Accountability is when you own your mistakes without turning yourself into a punching bag. Self-betrayal is when you punish yourself to spare other people the discomfort of being responsible. You've been doing that for a long time. It shows in the way you hesitate before you speak, like you're asking permission to exist. It shows in the way you try to predict moods, like you're walking through a house full of sleeping lions. It shows in the way you carry guilt that doesn't belong to you. Guilt from arguments you didn't start. Guilt from problems you didn't create. Guilt from other people's choices that you tried to prevent by sacrificing pieces of yourself. And still, you wonder why you feel hollow. Still, you wonder why you can't rest. Still, you wonder why compliments feel like lies. Still, you wonder why you're exhausted, even on days when nothing happens. Because your nervous system has been living in court for years, defending your right to be loved. And the judge is always someone else. That's what you need to grieve. Not just them, not just the relationship, not just the friendship, not just the respect you didn't get, but the years you spent negotiating for crumbs when you could have been building a table. And yeah, I said grieve, because grief is not only for death. Grief is for the version of you that kept hoping. Grief is for the time you gave away. Grief is for the apologies you offered for having a heartbeat. Grief is for the nights you lay there, phone glowing like a tiny moon, waiting for a message that would prove you mattered. And every minute that passed felt like a verdict. You remember those nights. Don't pretend you don't. You stared so hard at silence that silence started staring back, and you learned to translate it. If they cared, they would. If I mattered, they'd notice. If I was enough, they'd stay. Those translations carved grooves into you. And then, When someone finally did show up, when someone gave you a little warmth, you clung too quickly. Not because you were foolish, but because you were starving. Starving people don't ask if the meal is healthy. They just eat. That's not shameful. That's human. But you can't stay starving forever and call it love. I'm going to drag you through memory now, not to torture you, but to show you how your mind keeps lying to you in a friendly voice. You romanticize the beginning. You take the early sweetness, the early attention, the early promises, and you use them like a blanket over the later cold. You tell yourself, they weren't always like this, so maybe they can go back. You tell yourself, if I just say it the right way, if I just wait for the right time, if I just give them space, if I just prove I'm not a problem, they will remember who I am to them. No, they remember. They always remember. They just don't always care enough to act like it. And that's the part you avoid. Because it's cleaner to blame yourself than to accept that someone could see you clearly and still choose convenience over care. You'd rather believe you were unlovable than accept you were loved poorly. Because if you were loved poorly, then the world is unfair and you can't control it. If you were unlovable, then at least there's a project. Fix yourself, earn it, become better, become smaller, become easier, become perfect. Perfection is your little fantasy of safety. You think if you become flawless, nobody can hurt you. But flawless people are easy to use because they're desperate to stay flawless, desperate to avoid conflict, desperate to keep the peace. So they swallow disrespect and call it maturity. They accept neglect and call it independence. They endure betrayal and call it forgiveness. Forgiveness is not pretending the knife didn't cut. Forgiveness is acknowledging the wound without handing the blade back to the same hand. And here's another lie you tell yourself. You think walking away is cruelty. You think silence is cruelty. You think choosing yourself is cruelty. That's because you were taught that your value is measured by how much you can endure for others. You were praised for being strong when strong meant silent. You were admired for being patient when patient meant ignored. You were called good when good meant convenient. So now, when you set a boundary, your body reacts like you committed a crime. Your chest tightens. Your mind starts bargaining. You imagine them being angry. You imagine them leaving. You imagine being alone. And loneliness scares you because loneliness used to mean you were unwanted. Not because it actually means that, but because you were trained to interpret it that way. You didn't just fear being alone. You feared what being alone would confirm about you. But here's what they don't tell you in those little self-help slogans people toss around like candy. Being alone doesn't confirm you are unworthy. Being alone confirms you have standards. Being alone confirms you stopped auctioning your soul. Being alone confirms you can survive without an audience. And when people lose you, their regrets don't come from love alone. Sometimes they come from losing access, losing a listener, losing a fixer, losing a shield, losing someone who made their life smoother. That's why their regret can look like grief and still be selfish. That's why they show up when you're finally gone. Not because they suddenly grew a heart, but because the gap you used to fill started echoing. They miss the way you absorbed their chaos. They miss the way you made them feel important. They miss the way your loyalty made them feel safe, even while they were careless. And this is where you have to be honest. Part of you likes being missed because it's the closest you felt to being valued. But being missed is not the same as being respected. Being wanted is not the same as being cared for. Being needed is not the same as being loved. I've watched people cry over someone they treated like trash, not because they feel remorse, but because they miss the convenience of that person's devotion. That's one of those regrets they don't confess out loud. They regret thinking you'd always be there to catch them, because now they have to face the consequences of their own behavior without your hands under the fall. Another regret? They regret the silence they used as a weapon. You know that silence, the kind that's not calm, not thoughtful, but calculated. The kind that says, suffer until you come back begging. They thought it would break you into obedience. It broke you into clarity. They regret the moment they realized their control tactics stopped working because you stopped reacting, stopped pleading, stopped explaining yourself to someone committed to misunderstanding you. They regret the moment your eyes went flat and your voice went calm, because calm is not peace in someone like you. Calm is the door closing. They regret all the times you gave them one more chance, because every chance was a gift they treated like a chance. Refill. They regret the way they ignored your milestones and then acted offended when you stopped inviting them to celebrate. They regret the way they reduced you to your usefulness, because when you finally stopped being useful, they had to confront the fact that they never learned how to cherish. And the listener in you, the wounded one, still wants to believe at least one of them regrets the right things for the right reasons. Maybe someone does. I'm not denying that. But your recovery cannot depend on their sincerity. Your recovery has to depend on your discipline, on your willingness to tell yourself the truth, even when it stings. The truth is, you kept teaching people how to treat you by what you tolerated. The truth is, you stayed in rooms that made you small because leaving felt like failure. The truth is, you let apologies replace change because you wanted the story to end nicely. The truth is, you sometimes confused suffering with loyalty and called it noble. It wasn't noble. It was expensive. And you paid in sleep, in self-respect, in joy, in the ability to relax, in the ability to trust your own instincts. Your instincts were screaming long before you left. You just kept turning the volume down. You told yourself you were being dramatic. You told yourself you were overthinking. You told yourself you should be grateful. Gratitude is not a gag. Gratitude does not require you to accept harm. And I'm telling you now, face to face, close enough that you can feel every syllable like a fingertip on your bruises. You cannot heal while you keep protecting the people who hurt you from the consequences of what they did. You cannot rebuild while you keep rewriting your own pain into something more convenient for them to digest. Now watch how the rebuild starts. Because it doesn't start with motivation, it starts with disgust. Not disgust at them, at least not yet, but disgust at the old pattern. The part of you that kept begging for proof. The part of you that kept accepting the bare minimum and calling it something. The part of you that kept turning your own needs into a shameful secret. That part has to die. And I don't mean in some dramatic, self-destructive way. Don't twist my words. I mean it has to retire. It has to be fired. It has to be replaced with something colder and steadier. Self-mastery. Self-mastery is not about being hard. It's about being clear. It's about being the kind of person who doesn't need to shout to be taken seriously because your actions are consistent. It's about building a spine that does not bend every time someone with a loud personality walks into the room. It's about learning the difference between love that nourishes and love that drains, and choosing nourishment even when drainage feels familiar. Familiar pain is seductive. You know that. Familiar pain is like an old neighborhood. It might be dangerous, but you know the streets. Healthy love can feel suspicious to someone who's been trained to expect conditions. When someone treats you well, you start scanning for the trick. When someone is consistent, you wait for the drop. When someone respects you, you wonder what they want. That's not intuition. That's trauma pretending to be wisdom. Wisdom is quieter. Wisdom says, I will observe. I will not rush. I will not attach my identity to being chosen. I will not hand over my peace to someone who hasn't earned access. And earning access is not about grand gestures. It's about small consistency. It's about showing up when it's inconvenient. It's about speaking with honesty even when the truth makes them look bad. It's about defending you when you're not in the room. It's about apologizing with changed behavior, not with pretty words. You're going to rebuild by becoming allergic to excuses, especially your own. Because you've got a collection of excuses you use like soft pillows. Maybe they're busy, maybe they're stressed, maybe they don't mean it, maybe I'm too sensitive, maybe I'm asking for too much. Those excuses kept you in cages with the door open. The rebuild is you walking out. And it's going to feel wrong at first, because freedom feels wrong to someone who's used to negotiating for air. You'll feel guilty, you'll feel selfish, you'll feel cruel. That's the withdrawal. That's the old dependency leaving your body. Let it leave. Let it ache. Let it cry. Let it shake. And then get up anyway. Discipline isn't a mood. Discipline is a decision you repeat when your feelings throw a tantrum. You're going to rebuild by setting standards and enforcing them, not with anger, not with speeches, but with distance. Distance is the language people understand when words have failed. You're going to rebuild by becoming consistent with yourself, by keeping promises to yourself even when nobody claps. You're going to rebuild by stopping the habit of checking your worth through someone else's attention. Attention is cheap. Integrity is rare. You're going to rebuild by learning that silence does not mean you lost. Sometimes silence means you refuse to fight in a circus. And you love a circus, don't you? Not because you're childish, but because chaos feels like home. Chaos gives you a role. Chaos lets you be the fixer, the mediator, the one who calms the storm, and being needed makes you feel real. But the cost is you never get to be calm yourself. You never get to be held. You never get to just exist without proving your value. So the rebuild is learning to live without the role. That's terrifying. Because if you're not the helper, who are you? If you're not the loyal one, what are you? If you're not the one who stays, what do you have to offer? You have you. That's the answer you've been avoiding. You have your mind. You have your time. You have your dignity. You have the ability to choose your next move instead of repeating the last wound. And when you finally embody that, you'll notice something sharp and almost funny. The people who used to keep you close start getting uncomfortable. They'll test you. They'll throw little hooks into the water to see if you still bite. They'll send messages that pretend nothing happened. They'll make jokes about how serious you've become. They'll accuse you of changing. They'll act like your growth is an insult. That's one more regret they'll carry later, that they mocked your evolution because it reminded them of their stagnation. Let them regret it. Don't collect their regret like candy. Don't use it as proof. Use it as confirmation that your boundary is working. The point isn't to punish them. The point is to protect you. And protection is not hatred. Protection is love with a backbone. Protection is choosing not to place your heart in hands that have a history of squeezing. Protection is understanding that you can forgive someone and still decide they are not safe. You can wish them well and still walk away. You can remember the good and still refuse the pattern. And here's the cold truth that will set you free if you can stomach it. Not everyone deserves the best of you. Not everyone deserves access to your softness. Not everyone deserves the version of you that stays late, that listens, that cares, that gives. Your softness is not a public resource. It's sacred, quietly, practically sacred, because it costs you something. So you start treating it like it costs. You start charging for access in the only currency that matters: respect, consistency, effort, accountability. If they can't pay, they don't get in. Simple. And you, yes, you, stop apologizing for having that door. And when the room gets quiet after you stop chasing, that's when the last transformation happens. The one you've been afraid of because it feels like standing on the edge of a roof, looking down at emptiness. You stop needing an audience to validate your pain. You stop telling your story to people who only listen so they can judge. You stop explaining your boundaries to people committed to crossing them. You stop offering your wounds as evidence in a trial where the verdict was decided before you spoke. You learn to sit with your own mind without scrambling for distractions. That's not easy for someone like you, because your mind is loud and it drags up memories like they're bodies in a river. It shows you the moment you trusted the wrong person. It shows you the message you sent that never got a reply. It shows you the apology you offered that wasn't deserved. It shows you the day you smiled in public and then cried in private, quiet so nobody would hear. It shows you the way you were treated like you were replaceable, and you believed it for a while, because being replaceable was less painful than believing someone chose to lose you. But here's the thing about being replaced. It does not define your value. It defines their capacity. People replace what they do not know how to cherish. People discard what requires responsibility. People trade depth for convenience because depth demands honesty, and honesty demands change. That's why some of them will always regret losing you. Because losing you was the moment the world stopped being padded. Losing you was the moment their excuses stopped working. Losing you was the moment they realized they had been living off your patience like it was a power source. And yes, sometimes they'll come back, not with remorse, but with nostalgia. Nostalgia is dangerous. Nostalgia is a liar that wears perfume. It will show you highlights and hide the bruises. It will whisper, maybe this time, maybe now, maybe they learned. Sometimes people learn. Often they don't. Your job is not to gamble your peace to find out. Your job is to become so anchored in yourself that their return or their absence doesn't move you like a storm moves a paper cup. You become heavy. You become grounded. You become a person who can miss someone without abandoning yourself for them. And that's where your true strength starts. Not in rage, not in revenge, not in showing them what they lost, but in refusing to be the kind of person who needs to be mourned in order to be valued. You will value yourself while you are still here. You will speak your needs without apologizing for having them. You will walk away when the pattern shows its teeth. You will stop calling it love when it only exists when you are useful. You will stop negotiating with disrespect. You will stop giving your tenderness to people who treat it like a weakness. You will stop mistaking endurance for destiny. Endurance is not staying in harm. Endurance is surviving it and refusing to return. Endurance is waking up and building anyway, even when your chest feels like it's full of wet cement. Endurance is letting the wound teach you, not trap you. Endurance is choosing self-mastery when your old habits beg you to crawl back for familiar pain. You don't get to disappear. Not into bitterness, not into numbness, not into fantasies about being saved. You stay. You breathe. You face what happened without turning it into a shrine. You use it like a tool. You let it sharpen your discernment. You let it strengthen your boundaries. You let it teach you what you will never tolerate again. And when the nights come, because they will, and the loneliness tries to convince you that any company is better than silence, you remember this. Silence is only empty when you have nothing inside you. Fill yourself. Fill yourself with routine. Fill yourself with purpose. Fill yourself with principles that don't wobble when someone smiles at you. Fill yourself with the kind of dignity that doesn't need to be witnessed to be real. And then, when the world is quiet and you're finally alone with your own heartbeat, you will realize the most brutal, liberating truth of all. The moment you stopped begging to be chosen was the moment you chose yourself. And that choice, cold, calm, unromantic, turns every past humiliation into fuel, turns every regret into a lesson, turns every long silence into a spine, until even the memory of them can't pull you apart anymore. Until your pain becomes information instead of a prison. until the room can go completely still and you don't panic. You don't reach for crumbs. You don't reach for noise. You don't reach for a hand that used to drop you. You just sit there, steady, and the silence stops feeling like abandonment and starts feeling like strength. And that strength, the kind that doesn't need witnesses, starts doing something strange to you. Something almost unsettling at first, because you're used to pain being loud and obvious. You're used to suffering having a soundtrack. You're used to your heart making a scene when it bleeds. But real strength is quiet. And quiet is where your mind finally has no excuses to hide behind. You'll sit there and you'll notice the itch, the twitch in your fingers, the urge to reach out, to check, to peek at what they're doing, to measure your value against their new smiles, to compare your slow healing to their fast distractions. And you'll have to face a humiliating little truth. Part of you doesn't just miss them. Part of you misses the chase, misses the tension, misses the feeling of being almost chosen, because almost kept you moving, kept you hoping, kept you alive in that frantic way people mistake for love. You know what almost is? It's a leash made out of promises that never materialize. It's a slot machine you keep feeding because once in a while the lights flash and you feel seen. And your brain, that brilliant little liar, calls that connection instead of calling it what it is, conditioning. And that's why their regrets can haunt you even after you leave. Because you're still carrying the habit of waiting for proof, still carrying the habit of turning yourself into a question mark, still carrying the habit of needing someone else to confirm you weren't crazy for wanting basic respect. But I'm not here to pat your head and tell you you're special. I'm here to pull the last hook out of your skin. And hooks hurt when they come out, because they're designed to. You want to know what people regret after losing you, that they will never admit, not even to themselves, not in words they can hear without choking. They regret how easy it was to make you doubt yourself, because it gave them power without effort. They regret how they could be careless and you'd still be careful. They regret how you made their mess feel manageable because you carried shame that was supposed to be theirs. They regret how you listened, really listened, the way you caught the small tremor in their voice, the way you noticed what they didn't say, the way you read their silence like it was a confession. And they regret it because the next person they meet will hear their words but not their meaning, will see their surface but not their cracks, and for the first time they'll feel lonely inside a conversation. They regret the mirror you were, because you held up their behavior without screaming, just by being consistent, just by being sincere. And your sincerity made their games look cheap. They regret the way you offered them a safe place to be honest, because now honesty will cost them something, and they're not used to paying. They regret how you forgave, because your forgiveness trained them to believe consequences were optional. And when you left, consequences finally introduced themselves like a stranger at the door, with a calm face and heavy hands. They regret the look on your face the last time. Not the angry look, not the crying look, the other one. The one that happens when hope shuts off. When the light behind your eyes goes from begging to observing, because that look is the end of their influence. And people who live off influence panic when they lose it. They regret telling themselves you were replaceable, because now they have to live with the insult echoing back at them every time they realize the replacement laughs at their jokes but doesn't understand their soul. Every time they realize the new company is noise, not depth. They regret the way they treated your loyalty like a weakness, because loyalty like yours is a rare currency, and they spent it like loose change. And you can feel those regrets like phantom hands trying to pull you back, because you want justice, you want acknowledgement, you want the universe to stamp your pain with a seal that says validated. And I understand that hunger, I do, because you were denied something basic, to be taken seriously without having to collapse first. But if you keep needing their regret to feel whole, you'll be chained to them even while you're walking away. You'll be carrying their absence like a backpack full of rocks and calling it memory. You'll keep checking the rearview mirror while you're trying to drive forward, and you will crash into the same kind of wall again, just with a different face painted on it. So here's the next cut, sharp and clean. Their regret is not your medicine. Their regret is not your closure. Their regret is not your proof. Your proof is that you're still here, breathing, thinking, building, even after being treated like you were easy to lose. Your closure is your decision to stop reopening the wound for one more look. Your medicine is discipline, not drama. Discipline that doesn't argue with your emotions, but doesn't obey them either. Because the truth is, you don't just have wounds from them. You have wounds from you. From the way you abandoned yourself repeatedly to keep other people comfortable. From the way you betrayed your own instincts because you didn't trust yourself to be right. From the way you accepted disrespect and then tried to scrub the stain off your dignity by working harder, loving harder, giving more. You can't give your way out of being undervalued. You can't sacrifice your way into being respected. You can't explain your way into someone's empathy if their empathy is asleep on purpose. And I can tell you're tired. Not tired like you need a nap. Tired like your spirit has been carrying a weight it was never designed to carry. Tired like you've been walking around with a silent question lodged in your chest. What is wrong with me? And every time someone leaves, that question grows teeth. Nothing is wrong with you that requires you to be punished for existing. But there is something in you that needs training, and that's different. You need to train your standards until they become muscle memory. You need to train your mouth to speak before resentment rots your kindness. You need to train your eyes to see patterns instead of excuses. You need to train your hands not to reach for people who only touch you when it benefits them. Because you know what your real addiction is? Not them. Certainty. You were addicted to the idea that if you could just secure someone's loyalty, you'd finally be safe, finally relax, finally stop feeling like you're one mistake away from being left. But safety doesn't come from securing other people. Safety comes from securing yourself, from becoming a person who knows in your bones that you can survive loss without losing your identity. And that's why the rebuild has to go deeper than be confident, because confidence is a mood. It rises and falls. It depends on results. It depends on compliments. It depends on your reflection on a good day. Self-respect is not a mood, it's a law. It's something you enforce especially on your worst day. Self-respect is what stops you from crawling back to a familiar cage just because the outside air feels cold. And I know you. You've done that crawl before. Not always physically, sometimes emotionally, sometimes through a message you didn't need to send, sometimes through a conversation you didn't need to reopen, sometimes through just checking in when you were really checking if you still mattered, checking if the door was still unlocked, checking if you could still be wanted without being valued. And every time you did, you paid a tax, a little tax on your dignity, and those taxes add up until one day you wake up and you can't recognize yourself because you've been buying temporary comfort with long-term self-betrayal. So we're going to talk about debt, because your life has been full of invisible debts. The debt of swallowed anger, the debt of unsaid needs, the debt of apologies you gave to keep peace, the debt of nights you lost to overthinking, the debt of time you spent trying to understand people who refused to understand you. Debts don't disappear because you ignore them. They collect interest, and the interest is anxiety. The interest is exhaustion. The interest is bitterness. The interest is that hollow feeling you get when someone says, "You're so strong," and you want to scream because you didn't choose strength, you chose survival. Paying the debt looks boring from the outside, and that's why most people don't do it, because boring doesn't get applause. Paying the debt looks like waking up and doing the small things you promised yourself you'd do, even when you don't feel like it. It looks like eating properly, sleeping properly, moving your body, cleaning your space, reading something that sharpens your mind, writing down what you feel so your feelings stop controlling you from the shadows. It looks like not responding immediately when someone tries to pull you into old chaos. It looks like pausing and asking yourself, am I doing this because it's right or because it's familiar? Am I speaking because I'm honest or because I'm afraid of silence? Am I giving because I want to or because I'm trying to earn a place? And you might hate those questions at first because they expose you. They leave you with nowhere to hide. But that's the point. You've been hiding behind, "I'm just a caring person too." Avoid admitting you were terrified of being left. Caring isn't the problem. The lack of boundaries was. Love wasn't the problem. The absence of self-respect was. Loyalty wasn't the problem. The loyalty without reciprocity was. And once you start paying the debt, your nervous system will scream, because it will interpret calm as danger, because calm is unfamiliar, and unfamiliar used to mean you were walking into something you didn't understand. You'll feel restless, you'll feel empty, you'll feel like you're missing something, and that something will tempt you to go find a little chaos, just to feel alive again. This is where most people relapse into old patterns, not because they're weak, but because they confuse intensity with meaning. You must learn that peace feels quiet, and quiet can feel like emptiness until you fill it with purpose. Purpose doesn't have to be grand, it just has to be real. It can be your craft, your work, your learning, your family, your responsibilities, your health, your character. Purpose is what makes silence feel like a sanctuary instead of a punishment. Because you've been punished with silence before, haven't you? Silent treatments, unanswered messages, rooms where your pain was met with blank stares, people who vanished when you needed them. So silence became a threat to you, like it meant you were unwanted. But silence in your own control is different. Silence you choose is power. Silence you cultivate is clarity. Silence you live in on purpose is where you can finally hear your own intuition again, that voice you kept drowning out with other people's opinions. And when your intuition comes back, it's not dramatic. It doesn't shout. It doesn't beg. It simply points. This is safe. This is not. This is honest. This is performance. This is respect. This is convenience. And the more you listen, the more you'll start noticing the early signs you used to ignore. The way someone jokes at your expense to test how much you'll tolerate. The way someone makes you feel like you're asking for too much when you ask for basics. The way someone only reaches out when they want something. The way someone avoids accountability with charm. The way someone becomes vague when you ask for clarity. Those signs used to be background noise to you because you were trained to adapt, trained to rationalize, trained to keep the connection at any cost. Now, those signs will feel like alarms, not because you're paranoid, but because you're awake. And being awake is painful at first because you realize how many times you talked yourself out of what you knew. You'll remember that moment you felt something was off and you ignored it. You'll remember that conversation where you almost spoke up and then decided not to. You'll remember the time you caught a lie, but let it slide because you didn't want conflict. You'll remember all the little betrayals you forgave because you were afraid of what leaving would say about you. And you'll want to hit yourself with regret for being stupid. But you weren't stupid. You were hungry. You were hopeful. You were trying to survive in the only way you knew. And you did survive. The upgrade now is learning to survive without self-abandonment. And yes, people will regret losing you more as you become that version of yourself. Because the version of you they had access to was pliable. It could be pulled and shaped and guilted and coaxed into staying. The new version of you is not cruel, but it is solid. And solid people are hard to manipulate. Solid people don't argue with disrespect. They step away from it. Solid people don't chase closure from someone who refuses accountability. They create closure through their own standards. Solid people don't beg for love. They accept love that arrives with integrity. And integrity is what you're building. And it will feel lonely at times because integrity narrows your circle. It filters out the people who only liked you when you were easy. You will lose some people simply because you stopped being available for nonsense, and they will call that you changed. But what they mean is, you stopped making my life easier. Let them talk. Their mouths are not your mirror. And then comes the hardest part. The part you don't like admitting because it makes you feel exposed. You're going to have to forgive yourself for staying so long. Not forgive like excuse. Forgive like release. You're going to have to stop beating yourself up for not leaving earlier, because that self-attack keeps you stuck in the same emotional loop as the relationship did. Proving, apologizing, punishing yourself to earn peace. You don't earn peace by punishing yourself. You earn peace by learning. You say, I see what I did. I see why I did it. And I will not do it again. That's forgiveness with teeth. And once you start doing that, you'll notice something else. The memory of them will try to change shape. Your mind will start painting them as a villain or as a saint, depending on the day, because your brain likes simple stories. But real healing is holding complexity without letting complexity become an excuse. You can admit they had good moments without denying the pattern that hurt you. You can admit you loved them without letting love become a reason to return. You can admit you miss them without letting missing become a command. Feelings are weather, not law. You can feel rain without moving into the storm. You can feel wind without letting it decide your direction. And the more you practice that, the less power their absence has, because absence is only a weapon when you're still begging it to be filled by the same kind of person. If you build a life that feeds you, real routines, real goals, real people who show up, then absence becomes space, and space becomes opportunity. You'll start noticing that you can breathe deeper when you're not constantly adjusting yourself to someone else's moods. You'll start noticing that you laugh differently when you're not afraid a joke will be used against you later. You'll start noticing that you walk through your day without that tight little knot in your stomach that used to whisper, "Don't upset them, don't ask, don't need." And that's when you'll realize how much of your suffering wasn't just what they did, but what you did in anticipation of what they might do. You lived pre-hurt. You lived pre-abandoned. You lived pre-rejected. And that's a cruel way to live, because you're constantly mourning something that hasn't even happened yet. That habit came from a time when you were blindsided, when you trusted and got cut. So now you try to predict the cut to feel in control. Ah, they walked away, huh? Like you didn't matter. Like your silence meant surrender. Like your loyalty was disposable. They dipped when things got quiet. When the fire stopped burning. When you weren't handing out pieces of your soul on a silver platter anymore. But you want to hear the beautiful part, kid? You didn't chase. You didn't beg. You just disappeared. And that's when it started. That itch. That burn in their chest they couldn't scratch. That little whisper inside them at 2 a.m. saying, "You messed up." You see, presence. Real presence. It's not about loud noise. It's not about posts or texts or pretending to be fine. It's about that invisible grip you leave on someone's mind when they thought you'd always be there. And then you're not. And now they're choking on that silence. They're starving for what they used to drown in. You gave too much, didn't you? You gave time, energy, truth, loyalty. And what did they do? Treated you like a background character in a story you wrote for them. But here's the part they never tell you. Absence hits harder than presence ever did. It's not when you're around that they realize what you mean. No, it's when you vanish. Like smoke. Quiet. No explanations. No one last time. Just gone. That's when it begins. That's when your presence starts haunting them like a ghost they can't get rid of. And you want to know why? Because truth has a way of echoing. Loyalty has a memory. And silence, oh, silence screams louder than rage ever could. I know what you're feeling right now. That sting, that hollow chest, that tight throat. You think they forgot you, but the joke's on them, because now they can't stop remembering. That's the game nobody talks about. When you walk away clean, when you walk away without noise, they start writing a story in their heads. They question everything, every word you said, every move you made. They start to replay every scene like a broken film, hoping they missed something, but they didn't. You just meant more than they were ready for. And now they're craving you like air in a suffocating room. So here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna break it down for you. One by one. 10 reasons. 10 blades that twist in their mind long after you're gone. 10 things that make them miss you so bad it hurts. Not because you're perfect. Because you were real. In a world full of masks, you walked in barefaced. And they weren't ready for that. They weren't built for that. But now they look around and all they see is fake smiles and shallow hearts. And they whisper your name in rooms you'll never walk into again. Not because they love you. Nah, too late for that. Because they lost you, and now they want you back. Not for who you were, but for what they're not. So sit back, keep your silence, let them drown in the noise they chose. And while they scroll and stalk and wonder if you still care, let me tell you why they can't stop craving you. Let's begin. First reason. You were the only one who truly saw them. You know the sick part? They weren't even used to being seen. I'm not talking about likes on a post, or those fake "how are yous" people ask when they don't give a damn about the answer. I mean really seen. You noticed the pain they never admitted. You heard the silence between their words. You looked in their eyes and called out things they never said out loud. You saw past the filters, past the games, past the tough act. And for a second, just a second, they felt safe. Like maybe they didn't have to pretend anymore. Like maybe someone understood them without them needing to bleed for it. And that scared the hell out of them. Because people like that, they live in shadows. They wear their trauma like armor and call it independence. They push people away just to see who comes back. And you stood there. No mask, no backup. Just pure, raw presence. You made them feel human. And that kind of connection, you don't just forget that. You can fake a lot of things, but not being seen, not being understood. That sticks to the ribs, that burns. But here's where the joke flips. When someone's used to being invisible, and then someone shows up who actually sees them, it's like staring into a mirror they weren't ready for. You didn't just compliment them, you exposed them. Not not to the world. No, worse, to themselves. You made them face the fact that they've been hiding from their own reflection. You made them question how they've been living, who they've been choosing, what they've been accepting. You broke the pattern, and when you walked away, oh boy, it wasn't just the absence of a person. It was the disappearance of clarity, of light, of that one person who got it. And now, every time someone smiles at them, it feels hollow. Every "I miss you" from someone else feels rehearsed, because you meant it. You weren't perfect, but you were present. You weren't flawless, but you were real. And real doesn't grow on trees. It don't slide into DMS. It don't hit you up just when it's convenient. Real shows up when it's ugly. Real sits with the pain. And real walks away, not because it stopped caring, but because it got tired of proving its value to the blind. You didn't just see them, you made them feel seen. And now they feel more alone than they did before you showed up. Because before you, loneliness was a constant, normal. After you, it's a gaping hole, a loud silence, a ghost. That's why they crave your presence again. Not because they loved you right, but because they didn't know how to handle someone who loved deep. And that kind of wound, it reopens every night. In every room you're no longer in. In every moment they smile and secretly wish it was you there instead. You weren't a moment. You were a mirror. And they still can't look away from the cracks you left behind. Second reason, you gave without keeping score. That's the part that messes them up the most. You gave without needing to be reminded. You gave without needing to be begged. You gave without keeping a damn scoreboard. You gave when they didn't deserve it, when they were distant, when they were cold. You gave when all you got in return was silence, attitude, confusion. You gave your time. You gave your attention. You gave your soul. And you did it because you wanted to, not because you were trying to get something out of it. That's what separates you from the rest of them. They were used to transactional affection. I do this. You give me that. But you gave because it was in you. Because kindness wasn't a tactic for you. It was your nature. And they didn't know what the hell to do with someone like that. They thought there had to be a catch. Some hidden agenda. Some trap. They didn't believe someone could be that loyal without a leash around their neck. So they mistook you for weak. They took advantage. They tested how far you'd go. And you kept giving until you didn't. And now the absence of that giving, it burns. Now they notice that no one else checks in like you did. No one else shows up without a motive. No one else listens without waiting to talk. No one else gives without expecting receipts. And it eats at them. Because they remember the nights you stayed up just to talk them down from their chaos. They remember the little things, the way you noticed their mood before they even said a word. The way you remembered things they only mentioned once. The way you protected them from their own self-destruction without ever bragging about it. You gave like it was your job to carry both your world and theirs. And they just received. Greedy. Silent. Entitled. And now that fountain's dry. And the desert they're walking in, it's got your name written all over it. You want to know what haunts them? Not your leaving, not your silence, but the comparison. Every person they talk to now feels less attentive, less patient, less giving. You ruined average for them. You destroyed their taste for half effort. And now they crave what they took for granted. But it's too damn late, because you weren't a free refill. You weren't a vending machine. You were a human being with limits, with scars, with depth. And once you saw the pattern, the taking, the using, the empty gratitude, you pulled back. Not to punish, but to preserve what was left of you. And oh, now they sit there pretending they're fine, putting on smiles, acting like losing you was part of some grand plan. But late at night, when the world gets quiet, that guilt, that ache, it starts crawling up their spine. Because deep down they know they had someone rare. Someone who gave like love was infinite. And they know they didn't match it. They never even tried. And that imbalance, that unequal exchange, it haunts them more than any fight ever could. Because the moment they realized they couldn't find that kind of love again was the same moment they realized they never deserved it to begin with. Third reason, you stayed when it wasn't easy. You know what separates you from everybody else they ever met? You didn't just show up when it was pretty. You didn't just love them when they were lovable. You stayed when it was messy. You stayed when they were cold, distant, confused, and angry at things that had nothing to do with you. You stayed when their trauma started speaking louder than their love. You stayed when they were pushing you away, testing if you'd abandon them like everybody else. And you didn't. You kept showing up. Not because you were blind, but because you understood. You knew that pain doesn't come with instructions, that healing doesn't happen on a schedule. So, you gave them time, space, grace. You took hits that weren't meant for you. You held hands that trembled and still called them home. You stuck around when others would have left without looking back. And now, that loyalty haunts them. Because guess what? Nobody's staying now. People love fast and leave faster. One argument, they're gone. One bad day, they ghost. One mistake, they disappear. But you were different. You gave them chance after chance to be better. You believed in the version of them that even they stopped believing in. You didn't just see their scars. You respected them. You tried to love them through the storm. And now that you're gone, now that you finally had enough, that storm's all they've got left. And it's colder now, darker, because the one umbrella they had, the one soul who stood in the rain with them, isn't answering anymore. And here's the twist. They might not say it out loud. Pride won't let them. Ego's got a tight grip on that throat. But inside, they're screaming. They miss how safe you made chaos feel. How your words could calm 100 overthinking thoughts. How your silence never felt like distance. It felt like peace. You were their anchor. And they didn't realize that until they started drifting further and further without you holding them down. Now, they reach for people hoping to feel that same security. And it never comes, because those people don't care enough to stay. They don't dig deep. They don't ask the right questions. They don't listen long enough to understand. They just want the fun parts, the surface, the easy stuff. But you sat through the war. You took the punches. You tried to understand the language of someone who didn't even know how to speak their own truth. And now, they look back at the wreckage. And every time someone walks away from them for being too much, they remember how you didn't. And it breaks them, quietly, because they know they broke you. They know you had every reason to walk earlier, but you didn't. And that kind of loyalty, that kind of patience, it's unforgettable. It leaves a mark, a permanent bruise on the soul. So now they crave your presence, not because they've changed, but because they miss how you made their mess feel manageable, how you never judged their broken pieces, how you loved them when they were hard to love. But you're not there anymore. And all they're left with is the silence of someone who once stayed through hell and finally learned to walk away. Fourth reason, you never asked them to be anything but themselves. Here's the part that's eating at their insides, and they won't admit it to nobody, not even the mirror. You never asked them to change. You never tried to fix them. You didn't pressure them to become some ideal, some Instagram version of a partner, some picture-perfect person pretending to have it all figured out. Number, you accepted them as is, flaws, moods, mistakes, all of it. You weren't in love with their potential. You were in love with their present. And that kind of acceptance, that kind of unfiltered, unconditional space, it's terrifying for people who've spent their whole life wearing masks. You made them take it off, not by force, but by presence. You didn't try to make them better to make your life easier. You loved them right there, in the middle of the mess. And that kind of love, that kind of peace, it becomes a drug they don't realize they're addicted to until the supply runs dry. You want to know why it haunts them now? Because everywhere they go, they gotta pretend again, gotta act okay, gotta filter their emotions, gotta tone it down, hide the weird parts, fake a little confidence here, add a fake smile there, but with you, they were raw, They could be soft without feeling weak. They could be vulnerable without feeling judged. They could be quiet, and it was still enough. That's what they miss. That feeling of enough. That freedom. That I don't have to perform today kind of love. And now it's gone. And they're back in the circus. Back juggling egos and expectations. Back trying to be liked instead of being loved. You didn't need them to impress you. You didn't fall for the mask. They didn't even have to wear it. You saw value in their silence, in their broken thoughts, in their complicated stories. You saw them. Not the version they posted. Not the image they projected. Just them. And that's rare. That's once-in-a-lifetime type energy. People chase fantasies. You embraced the real. And the worst part? They weren't ready for it. They were scared of being seen. So, they sabotaged it. They kept you at arm's length while secretly hoping you'd hold tighter. They made you feel like you were too much when they were just afraid of not being enough. But now, they're out there, hoping someone else will love the same mess you did. And guess what? No one does. Because most people don't have that capacity. Most people want the shiny, the simple, the soft. But you were willing to sit with the fire. You didn't need them to shrink their chaos. You just asked them to be honest. And that honesty, that comfort, that's the echo in their chest now. Every time someone gets tired of them, every time that they feel like burden, every time they start to shut down again, they remember you, the one person who didn't ask for anything except truth. And now that you're gone, every part of them feels the pressure to pretend again. But the problem is, once someone tastes real acceptance, fake feels like poison. You didn't just give them attention, you gave them permission to be, to exist, to exhale. And now, they're holding their breath in every room you're not in, craving the version of themselves that only ever came alive when you were near. Fifth reason, you matched their darkness without running from it. They thought they were too broken to be loved, didn't they? Too complicated, too much, too cold one day, and too needy the next. They walked through life, thinking no one could ever handle the weight they carried. And then you showed up, and you didn't flinch. You didn't run when the walls got high, or the silence got thick. You didn't panic when they shut down or lashed out. You matched that darkness. You sat in it with them. No flashlight, no preaching, just you, present, unshaken. You understood that people like them weren't asking to be saved. They were asking not to be abandoned. And that's what you did. You stayed. You walked through their hell without trying to paint heaven over it. You didn't need to fix it. You just needed them to know they weren't walking alone anymore. And that was everything. Most people see a little sadness and they back off. They hear the trauma, the regrets, the messy past, and they politely excuse themselves. But not you. You didn't get scared by their shadows because you had your own. You spoke the same unspoken language. You understood that love isn't about rescuing, it's about recognizing. And they never forgot that. They never will. Because now they're surrounded by people who only want the light parts, the smiles, the wins, the joy, the social media version of healing. But none of them can sit still when the room gets heavy. None of them can handle the ugly cries, the dark thoughts, the nights where the pain gets louder than the logic. But you could. You did. And you made it look effortless. You didn't offer empty words. You didn't say, "I'm here for you," and disappear when it got real. You stayed through the withdrawals, the mood swings, the confusion. You didn't take it personal when they snapped at you. You knew it wasn't about you. You didn't get offended when they needed space. You gave it without punishment. You didn't guilt trip them for not being cheerful. You sat with them in silence and let that be enough. And that kind of presence, that kind of emotional strength, it can't be replaced. That's not something they'll find in the next person or the next. Because most people only know how to receive love, not hold space for it. And now, they miss that balance, that peace, that safety net, that feeling of not having to pretend to be healed when the wounds were still fresh. They miss the way your voice cut through the noise, the way your energy calmed the storm, the way you understood without needing paragraphs of explanation. They're sitting in rooms with people who don't even notice the shift in their eyes, while you used to read whole pages from a single look. That's what's killing them now. Not just your absence, but the silence that replaced your understanding. You weren't afraid of their demons. You danced with yours and still found the grace to hold them through theirs. And now that you're gone, they're drowning in their own darkness again. Only this time, there's no one sitting beside them saying, "It's okay, I'm not leaving." And they crave you, not just for the light you brought, but for how you held them when the lights went out. Sixth reason, your absence taught them what presence actually meant. You know what's funny? Not ha-ha funny, tragic funny. They never really understood what your presence meant until it became a ghost, until the calls stopped, until the texts went dry, until your name stopped showing up in their notifications and started echoing in their memories. They thought your presence was a given, that you'd always be there, that no matter how little they gave, you'd keep showing up like a habit, like background music, like air, unnoticed until it's gone. But now every room feels louder, every day feels longer, every moment feels emptier, because your presence wasn't just physical, it was spiritual. You weren't just there, you were there. Mind, heart, soul, attention. You were locked in, And now that it's gone, they're starting to realize just how rare that actually was. They're surrounded by bodies, but starving for presence. You gave them something people don't even know how to give anymore. You were invested. When they spoke, you listened. Not to reply, but to understand. When they hurt, you didn't just say, "I'm here." You showed up. Even when it was inconvenient. Even when you were tired. Even when they were pushing you away. Your presence wasn't something they had to earn. It was something you gave because you chose them. Over and over again. And they confused that consistency with convenience. They mistook your availability for weakness. They assumed they could treat you like an option, and you'd always be there, waiting in the background. But they forgot one thing. Real presence doesn't beg to be appreciated. It just leaves when it's taken for granted. Now that you're gone, everything feels off to them. The jokes don't land the same. The laughs feel forced. The conversations feel scripted. Why? Because none of it is you. None of it carries that depth, that sincerity, that energy that used to fill the air just because you were in the room. You weren't loud, but you were loudly felt. You weren't always speaking, but your silence was a comfort, not an absence. And now your silence is deafening. Because it doesn't say, "I'm here and I care." It says, "I'm gone and I gave you every chance not to lose me." That's the part that's driving them mad. They know they didn't fight to keep you. They know they played it cool, distant, unbothered. And now they're paying the price. They're dealing with strangers who reply fast, but care slow. People who say LOL, but never ask how their day was. People who show up for the party but vanish in the storm. And it's hitting them hard that you weren't just another person. You were a presence, a force, a healing space, a safe place. And now that you're not there to remind them of what that feels like, every little moment screams your name in its absence. And here's the part they'll never say out loud. They don't just miss you, they miss who they were when you were around. Calmer, lighter, more understood, more alive. You didn't just give them company, you gave them clarity. You gave them that rare feeling of being seen, heard, valued, even when they had nothing to offer. And now they're just another lonely soul, surrounded by people who only notice when they leave, not when they stay. You flipped the whole world upside down for them just by walking away. And now, every second of your absence feels like a lesson in presence they weren't ready to learn. Seventh reason, you were the calm in their chaos, and now it's all just noise. It used to be chaos inside them. You knew that. You felt it. The kind of noise that never shuts off. Overthinking, regrets, anger at the past, anxiety about the future, constantly running through their mind like a broken radio stuck between static and screams. And then came you, and you didn't fix it. You didn't silence it. You didn't promise to take it all away. But you sat in it with them. And somehow your presence didn't demand quiet. It became quiet, like the noise inside them finally had something stronger to listen to. You made peace feel possible without saying a word. Just your energy. Just your voice. Just the way you looked at them like you weren't afraid of their storm. Most people see chaos and run the other way. But you stepped closer. You made the madness feel manageable. That's why they could breathe deeper when you were around. That's why their heart didn't feel like it was sprinting even when the world was falling apart. Because you were the anchor, the eye of the hurricane, the calm. And now that you're gone, it's just noise again. Loud, messy, frantic noise. Everything's too much. Everyone's too loud. But not in volume, in vibe. The people they try to replace you with talk a lot but say nothing. They smile but offer no warmth. They touch but give no peace. It's all just static now. They can't find that quiet anymore. The kind that you gave without effort. The kind that came from knowing someone saw their worst and didn't run. You made them feel like they weren't crazy for breaking sometimes. Like they didn't need to explain their anxiety or fake a smile just to keep you comfortable. With you, they didn't need to shrink themselves just to fit. And now they feel like they're suffocating in every space that's not yours. They try to move on. They try to convince themselves that you were just a phase, just someone nice, just someone who cared too much. But the truth creeps in when it's quiet, when the calls end, when the new people get boring, when the masks fall off. That's when it hits. You weren't just someone. You were the silence between their storms. And now they're stuck chasing dopamine hits from conversations that don't go past the surface. They're stuck faking connections and pretending to laugh, all while thinking, this still doesn't feel like them. See, you didn't just love them, you understood them. You didn't just listen to what they said, you heard what they didn't. You spoke to the version of them that no one else ever met, the one buried under all the defenses. And now that version of them, it doesn't come out anymore. It went silent with you. They walk through life now surrounded by people who only meet the edited version of them, while you had access to the raw footage. That's what they crave. That's what keeps them up at night. Not your face, not your voice, not the things you gave, but the feeling. That rare, impossible feeling of being safe in the middle of their storm. Of finally finding peace in a world that thrives on pressure. Now it's gone. And peace feels like a myth, a memory, a dream they keep waking up from. And it gets harder every day to find that calm in someone else, because no one else was you. And no matter how hard they try to fill that silence, it keeps echoing your name. 8th reason, you made loyalty look easy in a world that doesn't know what it means anymore. They didn't know what to do with someone who didn't have a hidden agenda, someone who didn't flirt with options while claiming to be all in. Someone who didn't play games with silence or dangle attention like a prize to be won. You didn't need to be begged to stay loyal, you just were, even when they weren't sure about you, even when they fed you mixed signals, went quiet for days, acted hot and cold like love was some game of emotional dodgeball. You stayed real, you stayed honest, you stayed. And in a world that swaps people out like disposable batteries, the second things get uncomfortable, your consistency scared the hell out of them because it meant something. It carried weight. And they weren't used to that. They weren't used to someone who was all in, heart first, without needing conditions or contracts. You made loyalty look natural, effortless, even when it hurt you to hold it. You stood firm when they doubted. You defended them when they weren't in the room. You protected their name, even when they didn't protect your heart. You gave them the kind of commitment people swear they want, until they realize how little they know about deserving it. You were solid in a world full of see-through people, and they took that solidity and leaned on it like it would never crack. They tested it. They pulled away to see if you'd follow, and you did, until you realized loyalty isn't loyalty if it's never returned. And when you finally stepped back, they felt the collapse, because your presence wasn't just a person, it was a pillar. And they built comfort around it without once asking themselves how much it cost you to keep holding everything up. Now, they're surrounded by people who post loyalty over everything on their stories, but can't even be consistent in a conversation. People who disappear for days and come back like nothing happened. People who choose attention over affection, validation over value. They talk about loyalty like it's a vibe, not a choice, not a discipline, not a sacrifice. And that's when it hits them, that everything they let go of when they let you slip through their fingers. That wasn't normal. That wasn't common. That wasn't something they'll find again just because they want to. Because you didn't give loyalty because it was easy. You gave it because it was right. You didn't stay loyal when it was convenient. You stayed when it cost you, when you were misunderstood, undervalued, ignored. And even then, you didn't speak bad about them. You didn't expose their flaws. You didn't humiliate them to heal your own wounds. You just walked. And now that silence is screaming louder than any goodbye ever could. They scroll through people now, trying to find what used to be a given, but it's not there. The late night conversations are shallow. The trust is missing. The loyalty is conditional. And every now and then, when the fakeness gets too loud and the loneliness gets too real, they remember how you never needed a reason to stay true. You were loyal because that's who you are. Because loyalty wasn't a method, it was your identity. And now that you're gone, they're realizing they weren't ready for that kind of love. Because you can't fake loyalty. You either live it or you lose the one who did. And that's what's killing them now. You were rare. You were real. You were the one they'll never be able to replace. Not because you were perfect, but because you were loyal when there was every reason not to be. And they broke something they'll never find again in a world that doesn't know how to hold anything real. Ninth reason, you never tried to outshine them. You just wanted them to shine too. You never made it about you. And that's something they never truly processed until now. You weren't in competition with them. You weren't there to dim their light just to make yours brighter. You weren't trying to prove you were smarter, stronger, more successful, or more loved. You didn't play that petty game of trying to win a relationship. You were rooting for them. Really rooting for them. Their growth, it excited you. Their happiness, you fed it. Their wins, you celebrated like they were your own. And now they're surrounded by people who clap with one hand, people who smile in their face, but secretly keep score. People who offer support with strings attached and motives hidden beneath fake praise. And it's draining them, because nobody wants to see them shine for real. Nobody except the one who already left. You were different. You saw their potential and didn't use it as a threat. You used it as a reason to stay. You pushed them, not to control them, not to get credit, but because you believed in them. More than they believed in themselves. You remembered the little goals they whispered at 2 a.m. You reminded them who they were when they forgot. You saw the fear behind their confidence and the courage behind their silence. You didn't mock their dreams, even when they sounded crazy. You stood in the crowd, silent or not, ready to cheer them on, even when you weren't invited to. You didn't need the spotlight. You were the support system. And now that you're gone, that absence feels like a stadium echoing with silence when they need a cheer the most. They didn't see it then. They thought your quiet love was just background noise. They thought your selflessness was weakness. They thought your way of letting them lead sometimes, letting them shine, letting them be the loudest in the room. It was just your personality. Nah, it was strength. It was discipline. Because you knew your own value. You didn't need to compete. And that terrified them. Because the world taught them that love is about control, about power, plays, about leverage. But you didn't play those games. You just gave. You just supported. You just wanted them to win. Now, they're trying to navigate a world where every compliment feels rehearsed. Every relationship is built on ego. Everyone wants to be better than the other. They miss you, not because you flattered them, but because you were the only one who genuinely wanted to see them evolve. Not just survive, but thrive. You didn't need to dim their flame to light your own. You lit theirs and stood back with pride like, look at them go. And now they stand on their little wins, surrounded by people clapping with jealousy in their teeth, wondering why it all feels so empty. And the worst part? They look back now, realizing how you never made them feel small, never made them question their worth, never once said, "You owe me." You were humble in your love, powerful in your presence, secure in your silence. And that energy, that's not something you stumble into every day. That's not something they're gonna find just because they swipe right or say the right things. That's rare. That's divine. And that's why they crave you. Because when everyone else needed the spotlight, you were the stage they stood on. And they only realized that once the lights went out, and all that was left was darkness. 10th reason. You left quietly, and that silence became the loudest sound they've ever heard. See, anyone can leave loud, slam a door, throw a tantrum, yell, "I'm done," 10 times, so someone finally listens. But you didn't do any of that. You left like smoke. No noise, no warnings, no fireworks. Just gone. And that's what hit the hardest. That silence. It wasn't just quiet. It was surgical. It cut through the noise they were drowning in and exposed them to something terrifying. The absence of your energy. The absence of being cared for without asking. The absence of feeling safe, seen, and heard. They expected you to fight. They expected you to beg, to explain, to plead your worth like it was ever up for debate. But you didn't. You just vanished with your dignity intact. And that unbothered, composed, haunting kind of exit, it broke them in ways they'll never speak about out loud. Because silence, when it comes from someone who used to give everything, is not silence. It's a statement. It's a verdict. It's the final chapter written in invisible ink, left for their guilt to decode in the middle of the night. You didn't leave because you stopped caring. You left because they stopped deserving. And now every second of peace you spend away from them, it echoes. Every moment you don't check on them, every day you don't reach out, it builds like pressure, like punishment. Not because you're petty, but because your absence has power. You taught them that love doesn't scream, it doesn't chase, it doesn't beg for a seat at a table it built. It simply walks away when it realizes its value was being spent on the ungrateful. And now they replay everything. Every cold reply, every delayed message, every time they brushed off your efforts, every time they made you feel like you were asking for too much when you were just asking for consistency. They remember how they confused your patience with passivity, your grace with weakness, your silence with surrender. But now they understand. Now they feel it. That your silence was the loudest "I'm done" they've ever heard. Because people don't move like you did unless they're sure. And now, that certainty has become their sickness. Every time they open their phone and your name's not there, every time they laugh and realize it doesn't reach as deep, it's you. It's your absence. It's that quiet hole in their world they tried to fill with noise, but it just keeps growing. They'll never tell you this, of course. Too proud, too stubborn. But they talk to you in their head now. Whole conversations. What they should have said. What they wish they did. They scroll through old messages, pretending they're not looking for answers between the lines. They hear your name and flinch. They see someone who reminds them of your vibe and go silent. Because that kind of exit, it stays. It doesn't scream in the streets. It haunts in the quiet. It's not a door slam. It's the door disappearing entirely. And that leaves them knocking forever. You didn't leave to punish. You didn't disappear to manipulate. You left because you finally realized the difference between someone missing you and someone earning you. You gave them your soul, and they treated it like a souvenir. Now, all they have left is the echo of your presence, bouncing off walls that once held your voice. And no matter how many new people they bring in, no matter how many distractions they chase, nothing fills that silence, because it doesn't just remind them that you're gone, it reminds them that they lost something they'll never get back. lives in corners is not the kind you notice with your ears. It is the kind that sits behind the eyes, like a dim room you keep locked, like a hallway you avoid in your own head because the floorboards remember your weight. The air is still, not calm, just still, like it is holding its breath on purpose. The ceiling light does that soft, sick flicker that never fully goes out, and it makes everything look like it is waiting for permission to exist. Dust hangs there, floating slow, like time forgot how to fall. Somewhere, far away, a pipe knocks once, then regrets it, and then nothing again. No music, no conversation, no rescue noises. Just that empty space where you usually hide your thoughts under other people's voices. You recognize this. You have lived in this pause 1,000 times. Right before you reach for your phone. Right before you start a pointless task. Right before you feed yourself another story about how today is different. Your chest is tight in a way you pretend is normal. Your jaw is set like you are bracing for impact even when nobody is swinging. Your mind is already talking to itself, rehearsing, defending, explaining, editing. You call it thinking. It is really a little courtroom you keep open all day so you never have to hear the verdict. I have been in there with you, in that courtroom, in the back row where you never look, watching you play both sides until you forget there was ever a truth in the first place. You came here for silence like it was going to be a soft place to land, and you already know it is a hard place to sit. You thought the stillness would be empty. It is full. It is full of the words you swallowed, the faces you avoid in mirrors, the moments you keep folded up and shoved behind newer moments. It is full of you, the real you, the one you keep sedated with motion. Now you are stuck with it. Now you are stuck with me. You dress your denial up like a routine. You call it discipline when you wake up and do 10 things fast, not because they matter, but because speed makes you feel clean. You stack your hours like bricks, then hide behind the wall and tell yourself you built a life. You keep noise in your pockets, little buzzing screens, little half-laughs, little conversations that never touch anything real. You keep your hands busy so your mind does not start picking at the scab you never let heal. And you do it with a straight face, like it is not obvious. It is obvious. It is so obvious it is almost funny. Not loud funny, that thin kind of funny where the joke is that you still believe your own cover story. You tell yourself you are fine because saying anything else would mean you have to change something, and changing something would mean admitting you have been living wrong on purpose. You tell yourself you are tired because tired sounds respectable. Tired sounds like work. Tired sounds like a badge. You do not say hollow. You do not say scared. You do not say stuck. You do not say ashamed. You say tired. Then you keep moving. You keep feeding the machine that keeps you from feeling the gears grinding in your ribs. You avoid the quiet because the quiet does not let you bargain. Silence does not negotiate. Silence does not care about your excuses. Silence does not pat you on the head for surviving the day. Silence just holds up a blank page and makes you look at what you have been refusing to write. And the first thing you do when you see that blank page is try to smear it with anything. A little entertainment, a little gossip, a little plan for tomorrow, a little fake optimism that tastes like cheap sugar. You do not even enjoy it. A little entertainment, you just need it. The way a person needs a light on in a room they do not want to be alone in. You keep telling yourself the noise is your choice. It is not a choice when you cannot stop. It is a reflex. It is a flinch. You have a whole museum of tricks for not seeing yourself. You intellectualize your pain so you can touch it with gloves. You name it stress so you do not have to call it grief. You call your avoidance self-care so it sounds smart instead of cowardly. You tell yourself you are protecting your peace when you are really protecting your lie. You can analyze everything you feel. You can label it. You can trace it back to some event. You can quote a clever line you read somewhere, and you still cannot sit in a quiet room without itching to escape. That is not insight. That is decoration. That is you hanging curtains over a broken window and acting surprised when the wind still gets in. You rewrite your memories in real time. You edit the past so it does not accuse you. You tell yourself you did what you could. You tell yourself you did not know better. You tell yourself the other people were worse. You tell yourself you will fix it later. Later is your favorite hiding place. Later is the place you bury the things you cannot face today and then pretend they are gone. And you keep a soft, private list of the moments that proved you were not enough, and you never read it out loud, but you carry it everywhere. The time you froze when you should have spoken. The time you laughed at something that hurt you because you did not want to be difficult. The time you stayed because leaving would have meant admitting you had wasted years. The time you left because staying would have meant you were seen too clearly. You do not forget these. You store them like evidence. Then you act shocked when you feel heavy. You have trained yourself to be a professional at minimizing your own wounds. You show up with a smile that does not reach the eyes. You answer with words that are safe. You keep your real thoughts behind your teeth like they are contraband. You have convinced yourself that being unreadable is being strong. It is not strength. It is hiding. It is you living as a shadow of your own life, because a shadow cannot be judged, and you have been terrified of judgment since the first time someone looked at your need and called it too much. You learned that lesson early, and you never questioned it. You built a personality around it. You built habits around it. You built your silence into a weapon against yourself, and you call it composure. Denial works until the body stops cooperating. One night, the noise fades. The screen goes dark. The room gets quiet, and your chest does that thing. That tight squeeze that feels like a hand closing around the center of you. Your stomach turns like it is trying to crawl away from your spine. Your throat dries out, not from thirst, from unsaid words. Your thoughts start hitting the same wall over and over, the same memory, the same shame, the same image you pretend does not matter. And you lie there, staring at nothing, listening to your own heartbeat like it is a countdown. That is when you realize your pain does not live in your ideas. It lives in your muscles. It lives in the way your shoulders refuse to drop. It lives in the way you flinch at kindness because kindness feels like a trap you do not deserve. It lives in the way you can hear a certain tone in someone's voice and your whole nervous system snaps to attention like it is back in an old room you never escaped. Smells do it too. A detergent, a cheap cologne, a stale hallway, a certain kind of rain on pavement. You do not choose those triggers. They choose you. They reach in and pull the curtain open on scenes you have been keeping in the dark. You remember the day you learned to swallow your anger. You remember the day you learned your tears made people impatient. You remember the day you realized nobody was coming to say the right thing. You remember the day you promised yourself you would never need again. And you kept that promise the way people keep the worst promises. Faithfully, proudly, until it turns into a cage. Pain is not dramatic most of the time. It is not a screaming monster. It is a quiet debt. It sits there, unpaid, and it collects interest while you pretend the account is closed. And when the silence arrives, it hands you the bill without emotion. That is the part you hate. Pain does not hate you. Pain is not personal. Pain is honest. And you have been allergic to honesty because honesty would force you to stop performing. It would force you to admit what you lost, what you wanted, what you endured, what you tolerated, what you allowed. That admission feels like suffocation because your whole life has been built around not admitting. Here's the part you keep misunderstanding. And it is not because you are stupid. It is because you are committed to not seeing it. Your pain is not proof you are broken. It is proof you are awake enough to register reality. The numb people do not hurt, not in the way they can feel. They drift. They decay quietly. You did not drift. You stayed conscious through things that should have turned you into an empty shell. And now you act offended that your mind kept receipts. That is what awareness is. Receipts. Not poetry, not inspiration, not some bright idea that makes everything soft. Awareness is accounting. It is looking at what happened and what it cost. It is recognizing the pattern you keep repeating because it is familiar, not because it is good. It is seeing how you keep choosing the same kind of disappointment because at least it is predictable. It is watching yourself reach for comfort the moment discomfort shows up, and then admitting that comfort has been the chain around your ankle. You want pain to go away first so you can become brave later. That order is backward. You become brave by standing in the pain without without turning it into a story that lets you escape. You become aware by refusing the little lies you whisper to yourself to make the day easier. You stop saying you cannot. You start saying you will not. You stop saying you are fine. You start saying you are afraid and you are still here. Not as a confession, as a fact. And facts are brutal because they do not care about your mood. Awareness will strip you. It will take your excuses, your labels, your self-image, and it will leave you with a raw, plain truth. You have been choosing what hurts you because you know how to survive it. You have been avoiding what could heal you because healing requires a new version of you, and you do not trust yourself to exist without the old wounds as an identity. You have made your suffering into a personality, so you never have to risk being ordinary. Because ordinary means you do not get a special reason to stay stuck. Awareness takes away the special reason. Awareness makes it simple. You did what you did. You avoided what you avoided. You stayed where you stayed. You lied where you lied. You can keep doing it or you can stop. Not someday, not when it feels safe. When the truth is in front of you, the choice is in front of you too. And pretending otherwise is just another trick. Controlled suffering is the moment you stop being dragged. You have suffered plenty already, but it was sloppy suffering, accidental suffering, suffering you stumbled into because you kept walking backward through life. Controlled suffering is different. Controlled suffering is you deciding that discomfort will no longer be the boss of you. Not as a heroic speech, as a practice. You do not need grand gestures. Grand gestures are for people who want applause. You need small, deliberate confrontations with the parts of yourself that panic when things get real. You sit with the silence for 5 minutes longer than you want, and you do not fill it with distractions. You feel the urge to flee, and you do not obey it. You notice the thought that says you are doomed, and you do not argue with it. You let it pass like garbage floating down a gutter. You do the hard task first, the one you keep avoiding because failing at it would expose you. And you do it while your hands shake, and you do it anyway. You say the honest sentence you keep choking back, not to be cruel, not to be dramatic, but to stop living in half-truths that poison you slowly. You stop asking the world to make it easier, and you start making your mind more capable. That is controlled suffering. It is training. It is you choosing a clean pain over a dirty pain. Clean pain has a purpose. Dirty pain is the same wound reopened every day because you refuse to change what causes it. You have been living in dirty pain for so long that you think it is your natural state. It is not. It is a habit. And habits can be broken, but only if you stop treating your discomfort like an emergency. Your nervous system learned to sound alarms because alarms got you attention once, or got you safety once, or got you out of trouble once. Now the alarms go off for everything, and you obey them like they are law. Controlled suffering is you hearing the alarm and and still walking forward. Not recklessly, not to punish yourself. To teach your body and mind a new rule. The rule is this: discomfort does not mean danger. Discomfort means growth is nearby, and growth is always ugly at first. You do not get to skip the ugly part. You endure it on purpose, in measured doses, until the measured doses turn into a new baseline, and you will hate it. You will hate it because it removes your favorite excuse, the excuse that you could not help it. You can help it. That truth is heavy, and it is also power. Endurance is where your fantasies die. Endurance is where the part of you that wants a quick transformation gets buried under the weight of ordinary days. You will not feel strong most of the time. You will feel bored. You will feel irritated. You will feel like nothing is happening. You will have mornings where your mind tries to sell you the old deal, the deal where you go back to numbing, back to pretending, back to being half asleep, because half asleep hurts less. Endurance is saying no to that deal without making a speech about it. Endurance is doing the right thing when the right thing feels pointless. Endurance is showing up when nobody notices. Endurance is rebuilding trust with yourself, and trust is slow. You broke it 100 times in small ways. You said you would change, and then you did not. You said you would stop, and then you did not. You said you would take care of yourself, and then you traded yourself for comfort again. That is not a moral failure. That is a pattern. Endurance breaks patterns by repetition, by consistency, by refusing to be dramatic about it. You will feel lonely in endurance because the version of you that had excuses had company. People understand excuses. People applaud stories. People like you when you are relatable in your suffering. Endurance makes you less entertaining. It makes you quieter. It makes you harder to manipulate. Some people will drift away when you stop performing your wounds for them. Let them drift. You are not a stage. You are not here to provide them a feeling. Endurance also means you stop begging for validation that comes too late to matter. You do not need someone to clap for you at midnight when you choose not to betray yourself. You do not need someone to hand you permission to be disciplined. You build the discipline like you build muscle, by resistance, by fatigue, by staying when leaving would be easier. And you will fail sometimes. You will slip. You will fall back into old habits. Endurance is not never falling. Endurance is learning how to stand back up without turning the fall into a reason to stay down. You do not dramatize the mistake. You correct. You continue. You do it again the next day, and the next, and the next, until your mind learns that your promises are not decorations. They are commands. There is a moment, after enough nights where you do not run, after enough mornings where you do not bargain, after enough days where you do not anesthetize yourself with noise, when the silence changes It stops feeling like a threat. It stops feeling like an interrogation lamp. It becomes a room you can enter without bracing. You sit in it and you feel the old ache. And the old ache does not own you. You feel the shame rise like heat, and you do not flinch away. You let it pass through, because you finally understand shame as information, not as a sentence. You understand weakness as a phase, not as an identity. You understand pain as a signal, not as a prophecy. You understand endurance as a skill, not as a personality. And the strongest thing that happens is not that you feel better. The strongest thing that happens is that you see clearly. Clarity is brutal. Clarity does not soothe. Clarity does not hype you up. Clarity simply removes the fog you used to hide in. You recognize your own tricks the moment they begin. You catch the impulse to lie to yourself at the start, not after it has already stolen weeks. You notice your mind trying to turn discomfort into drama, and you refuse the performance. You stop needing chaos to feel alive. You stop needing someone else's approval to feel real. You become harder in the quiet. Not hard like cruel, hard like stable. Like something that does not bend every time a feeling shows up. You carry your pain properly now, not like a secret disease, not like a badge, but like a weight you can lift without pretending it is not heavy. You stop calling your survival luck. You stop calling your suffering fate. You call it what it is. You endured. You learned. You changed. You did the ugly work with no audience. And that is why the silence cannot scare you anymore. Because the silence is no longer where you hide. The silence is where you stand, fully awake, with nothing left to deny, nothing left to decorate, nothing left to run from, nothing left but what is true. And what is true is enough to hold you up. Silence. And now the word sits in your mouth like a coin you cannot spend back into the past. Because once you name the quiet, you stop being able to pretend it was empty. You feel that shift in you, that ugly little click. The one that happens when a lie finally runs out of oxygen and the room stops letting it breathe. And you already know what comes next, because clarity does not arrive like a sunrise. It arrives like a door slamming behind you. It takes away your exit. It turns the hallway into a straight line. It makes your old habits look like what they always were. Not comfort, not personality, just tactics. Just survival moves you kept using long after the emergency ended. And the worst part is not that you see it. The worst part is that you feel the relief of seeing it, and you hate yourself for the relief. Because you have been trained to treat relief like weakness. Like it is some kind of betrayal of the pain you clung to. As if suffering was the only proof you were real. I am telling you that relief is the first sign you stopped bargaining with the truth. And the truth is not kind. It is clean. And clean things cut deeper because there is nowhere for your excuses to stick. No grime for them to hide under. And you can stand there with that clean cut and still try to act tough, still try to act above it, still try to act like it does not matter. But your nervous system already recognizes the difference. It already knows the game changed. Because before, you could always say you did not know. You could always say you were confused. You could always say it was complicated. And now you cannot say any of that without hearing the hollow sound of your own voice. And that sound is the first new pressure. The pressure of being witnessed by yourself. The pressure of having no private place left to lie without feeling the lie as physical weight pressing down behind your ribs, heavy and exact. You used to think denial was just avoiding a feeling, but denial is a whole operating system. It decides what you notice and what you edit out. It decides which memories you let play and which ones you shove into a dark folder marked later. It decides who you become in front of people and who you become when the door closes. And you have been running that system so long, you forgot it was installed. You forgot you could uninstall it. And now that you see it, you are going to feel exposed in a way that has nothing to do with other people. It is the exposure of realizing your own mind has been playing you, not with malice, with efficiency, because it learned that if it distracts you fast enough, you will not have to feel the sting of who you are right now compared to who you keep pretending you are. And you keep feeding that efficiency with little rewards, little hits of relief, little bursts of busy, little quick comforts that never touch your real hunger. And you call that normal life. And you call that maturity. And you call that being practical. But it is just addiction with better manners. You are addicted to not being present for your own standards. Because being present would mean watching yourself choose the easy route while your conscience stays awake and stares straight at you. And that stare is unbearable when you still want to believe you are the kind of person who does hard things. And you are. But you have been doing the wrong hard thing. You have been doing the hard thing of carrying the lie every day, instead of doing the clean hard thing of dropping it and dealing with the consequences. And the consequences are not always dramatic. They are slow. They are ordinary. They are the quiet cost of every small betrayal. The cost that shows up as a dull disgust you cannot explain. The cost that shows up as irritability when nothing is wrong. The cost that shows up as sleep that never restores you because you went to bed with unfinished truths sitting in your chest like unpaid rent. Now the silence stops being a room and starts being a mirror. And you are not going to like what it reflects first. Because the first layer it shows is not the heroic you, it is the petty you, the avoidant you, the you that keeps score of unfairness while ignoring the ways you rigged the game to protect your ego. The you that can list 10 reasons other people failed you but goes blank when it is time to list the moments you abandoned yourself. You will notice how you set traps for your own improvement, how you make goals vague so you can never be caught failing, how you keep promises to everyone else because you fear their disappointment, and then treat your own promises like they are optional because your disappointment feels familiar, almost comfortable, like an old bruise you keep pressing to prove it is still there. You will see the subtle cruelty in that, the way you punish yourself for not being perfect by refusing to give yourself the structure that would actually let you change. And you will call it being realistic, and you will call it being humble. But it is just fear in a suit. Fear that if you genuinely try, fully, cleanly, with no escape hatch, and you still fall short, then you will have to accept a version of yourself that cannot hide behind potential anymore. And potential has been your favorite mask. Potential has been the story you tell so you do not have to become anything. And clarity strips that mask with no sympathy. It makes you face the plain arithmetic of effort and outcome. It makes you see that the person you become is the sum of what you do when nobody is watching. And the silence is watching. Always watching. Without blinking. Here is where controlled suffering gets sharper. Because it is not just about doing hard tasks. It is about refusing the cheap relief that makes you small. You will feel the urge to reach for a distraction the moment your mind starts touching something raw, and you will not treat that urge like a command. You will treat it like a symptom, like a twitch in a muscle that has been trained wrong. You will sit in a chair with your hands empty and let your brain throw its tantrum, because that is what it does when you stop feeding it noise. It throws tantrums. It invents emergencies. It starts producing excuses like a factory at peak speed, and you will watch it like a clinician watches a patient try to bargain, not with contempt, with cold interest, because you are learning the mechanics of your own escape routes. You will catch the moment you turn a small discomfort into a reason to quit. You will catch the moment you inflate a minor setback into a prophecy. You will catch the moment you start building a narrative so you do not have to do the next boring, necessary step. And you will cut the narrative off mid-sentence, not with a pep talk, with action, with one simple move that proves you are not trapped, like standing up and doing the thing you keep postponing, like sending the message you have been rehearsing in your head for weeks, like closing the tab, putting the phone in another room, leaving your hands with nothing to do but shake. You will learn to tolerate the shaking, and that tolerance will become a kind of authority inside you. The authority of not obeying every impulse that shows up wearing the costume of urgency. The next pressure is social, and it is brutal because it comes disguised as concern. When you start living with clarity, other people feel it before they understand it. They feel it as a change in your timing. You respond slower. You smile less for no reason. You stop filling gaps with chatter. You stop rescuing them from awkwardness. And they will try to drag you back into the old rhythm because your old rhythm made them comfortable. Some will test you with little jabs, little jokes, little guilt, little reminders of who you used to be when you were easier to predict, and you will feel that familiar itch to explain yourself, to justify, to smooth it over, to make everyone okay, because you learned early that being liked was safer than being honest. Clarity tells you to let them be uncomfortable. And that instruction will feel cruel at first because you confuse boundaries with hostility. You confuse firmness with arrogance. You confuse silence with weakness. And you will want to prove you are still good, still kind, still the same. But the same is exactly what kept you trapped. You will practice letting people misunderstand you without sprinting after their approval. You will practice ending conversations without performing a happy ending. You will practice saying no in a flat voice and then shutting your mouth. Because the old you talked too much. The old you explained too much. The old you tried to control perception because you were terrified that someone would see the truth before you were ready to show it. Now the truth is not a performance, it is a posture, and your posture does not need permission. Your body is going to retaliate when you stop numbing. And this is where most people fold, because they mistake the return of feeling for proof they are getting worse. You are not getting worse. You are regaining sensation. And sensation hurts when you have been locked down for years. Old anger will surface, not explosive, dense, like wet sand filling your chest. And it will attach itself to small events, a delayed reply, a careless comment, a look that reminds you of a look from long ago. And you will be tempted to discharge it onto whatever is nearest just to feel lighter. But dumping emotion is not strength, it is leakage. Strength is containment without repression. It is holding the charge long enough to decide what it means. It is noticing the physiological signs, the tight throat, the clenched hands, the shallow breathing, and choosing to widen the breath anyway, choosing to unclench anyway, choosing to speak slower anyway. Controlled suffering here is restraint, and restraint is not passivity, it is command. It is you proving to your own nervous system that you can carry intensity without being owned by it. You will also feel fatigue that is not sleep fatigue. It is the fatigue of no longer lying. Because lying takes energy. Hiding takes energy. Maintaining the image takes energy. And now that energy is being reallocated. Like a city cutting power to useless billboards so the hospitals can stay lit. And you will miss those billboards for a while because they were familiar. But familiar is not the same as healthy. Familiar is just what you survived. Endurance at this stage stops being about pushing and starts being about precision. Because you are no longer trying to prove you can suffer. You already proved that. You are trying to suffer in the correct direction. You will build routines that are plain, unglamorous, and non-negotiable. Not because you are trying to become some polished machine, but because your mind needs rails. And without rails, it will wander back into the old neighborhoods where you used to buy comfort cheap and pay for it later. You will choose environments like a strategist, not like someone hoping willpower saves them, because you know willpower is a limited resource, and your weakness is not moral, it is structural. You will remove the easy triggers. You will cut down the access points. You will stop letting your worst habits live within arm's reach, and you will not call that fragile. You will call it intelligent. You will also stop making endurance a mood. You will stop waiting to feel ready. You will stop expecting motivation to carry you, because motivation is noisy, and your strength now is quiet. You will move without ceremony, and that will feel empty at first, because you are used to emotional fireworks to mark progress. But progress in real life is usually silent, and that silence will start to feel like respect. Inner strength, born from clarity, has a specific taste, and it is not sweet. It is metallic, like blood in the mouth after you bite down too hard. It is the taste of consequence. You will realize you cannot keep certain people close without shrinking, and you will let distance happen without turning it into a war. Because clarity does not need drama to be decisive. You will realize you cannot keep certain habits without paying with your self-respect, and you will stop them like you stop a leak, not like you stop a romance. Because romance with your own destruction was always the problem. You will also realize that your mind has been treating suffering like currency. Like if you suffer enough, you earn the right to rest. And that system kept you trapped. Because rest became something you had to purchase with misery, instead of something you were allowed to take as maintenance. Clarity reframes rest as strategy, not reward. And that will unsettle you, because it removes another excuse to keep punishing yourself. You will start doing things because they are correct, not because they make you feel impressive. And that shift will gut a part of your ego that lived off struggle as identity. And you will grieve it quietly, because even unhealthy identities feel like home when you have lived there long enough. Grieving the old you is not weakness. It is the cost of evolution, and you will pay it without turning it into a performance. The final pressure is the one nobody warns you about, because it does not look like pain. It looks like emptiness. The calm after you stop feeding chaos. You will have moments where you stand in your own life and it feels strangely quiet, like you expected a soundtrack and got raw audio. And you will feel the urge to manufacture turmoil just to feel familiar again, to pick a fight, to reopen an old wound, to scroll until your brain turns to mush, to do anything that makes the silence break. This is where your clarity becomes a weapon against your last addiction, the addiction to intensity. You will let the emptiness sit there without trying to fill it, because emptiness is not a problem. It is space, and space is where the new you grows. You will learn to let a day be plain without calling it wasted. You will learn to let progress be boring without calling it fake. You will learn to let your mind be quiet without calling it dead. And that learning will feel like suffocation at first, because your old self only knew how to breathe in smoke. But you will keep breathing clean air anyway, and slowly the clean air stops feeling thin. It starts feeling normal, and then one day you realize you have been standing in the silence for a long time without needing to run. And that realization does not arrive with celebration. It arrives with a small, cold certainty that settles into your bones. The certainty that you can be alone with yourself and not collapse. The certainty that you can carry your pain without letting it steer. The certainty that your thoughts are no longer a place where you get ambushed because you have taken the seat of command, and you did it the only way it can be done, by staying, by watching, by enduring, by refusing to lie, until the only thing left in the room is what is real, and what is real stays quiet, and that quiet is yours, and it stays, and it does not beg, and it does not explain, and it does not need applause, because it is built, and built things do not need to be believed. They just stand in the silence.
Silence. It does not hold you like a blanket. It holds you like a blacklight in a cheap room, showing every stain you swore was invisible. And that is why you used to hate it. Because you could do a whole day of clean acting and still come home with your hands dirty, and the quiet would show it without saying a word. Now you stand in it, and you do not look away. And the next thing that happens is small enough to miss if you are still addicted to drama. Because strength starts as a tiny, ugly decision. The kind nobody claps for. The kind that feels almost insulting in how ordinary it is. Like getting up when you said you would get up, even though the bed is warm and your brain is already building a case for delay. Like stopping your hand halfway to the screen because you know exactly what you are trying to avoid. Like sitting with the tightness in your chest and letting it exist without rushing to fix it. And the pressure you feel in that moment is different from pain. It is the pressure of being responsible for the next second. Responsibility is heavier than suffering. Because suffering lets you point outward, and responsibility points inward and stays there. And you have been dodging that point for a long time, with noise, with busyness, with 1,000 little habits that made you feel like life was happening to you instead of being built by you. And now the silence takes away your favorite illusion. The illusion that you are reacting. You are choosing. And the choice is not dramatic. It is microscopic and constant. And that is what makes it unbearable to the old version of you. Because the old version of you wanted one big moment to prove you were different. One grand shift, one clean transformation that erases the past like it was a bad file you could delete. But reality does not work that way, and you know it. You have always known it. You just hated the price. And the price is this: a long line of small choices where your mind begs for a shortcut and you do not give it one. Where the part of you that loves comfort starts whining like a spoiled animal and you do not soothe it with sugar. You just keep moving. And you feel the raw, quiet humiliation of realizing that your personality was mostly a pattern of avoidance dressed up as preference. The silence forces you to watch that pattern in real time, like seeing your own footprints in wet concrete and understanding you cannot pretend you were not there. Your inner voice does not disappear when you get clear. It gets smarter. It gets slicker. It stops yelling and starts whispering deals. And this is where you either become solid or you become a storyteller again. It will offer you rational reasons that sound responsible. It will tell you to wait until the timing is better. It will tell you to protect your energy. It will tell you that you have already grown enough. It will tell you that you
deserve a break. And every one of those lines has a kernel of truth inside it. And that kernel is the hook. Because the voice is not trying to convince you with nonsense. It is trying to seduce you with almost truth. With just enough logic to make you feel intelligent while you walk backward. You have been falling for that because you treat thoughts like they are leaders. Like if a thought shows up, it must be obeyed. And the new strength you are building is the strength to demote your thoughts, to see them as passing activity, electrical chatter, conditioned reflex. You start recognizing the specific distortions you rely on, the way you catastrophize a small discomfort into a permanent identity, the way you personalize other people's moods until you feel guilty for existing, the way you minimize your progress because acknowledging it would require you to keep going, the way you future trip into anxiety so you do not have to do the present work. You stop arguing with these distortions because argument gives them importance, and you stop confessing them as if confession is effort, because talking about your patterns is not the same as breaking them. Instead, you impose a colder rule, the kind of rule that makes your mind furious because it cannot debate it. The rule that says you do not negotiate with yourself at the point of action. You decide before the moment arrives. You decide while you are calm. And when the moment comes, you execute the decision like a contract. This is the part nobody likes because it feels authoritarian. And it is. It is you becoming the authority inside you. The part that sets terms instead of pleading. The part that stops giving equal time to every anxious thought like this is some fair election. Your mind is not a democracy when it is trying to sabotage you. It is a street hustle. And you have been the easy customer. Nodding along, paying full price, walking away feeling robbed and still pretending it was your idea. Then the silence starts exposing your cravings for intensity. Not pleasure, intensity. The spikes you chase because flat days make you feel like you are disappearing. You have trained yourself to need a certain level of stimulation to feel alive. And when you stop feeding it, you go through a withdrawal that looks like restlessness, irritability, that itchy sensation that makes you want to stir the pot just to hear something splash. You will notice how your attention tries to latch onto anything sharp, a conflict, an outrage, a fantasy, a memory that burns, because a burning memory is louder than the present, and you have used loudness as proof of meaning. The new discipline is learning that meaning is often quiet and repetitive and plain, and that your nervous system will call it emptiness because it is unfamiliar. You stop obeying that alarm and you start reconditioning yourself the hard way by staying in the plane, by doing the routine even when it feels dead, by letting your brain complain without giving it a reward, by letting boredom show up and not treating it like an emergency. Boredom is not a threat. It is your mind learning to stop demanding fireworks. And that process is ugly because you feel everything you used to drown out. The subtle grief, the low-grade anger, the background regret,
The sadness that comes from seeing how much time you traded for numbness. You do not fix that sadness with slogans. You let it sit. Because sadness has a job. It marks loss. It marks what mattered. It marks the cost of your choices. And when you let it do its job, it stops having to chase you. You also start noticing how your focus improves when you stop feeding it scraps. How your patience grows when you stop jolting it every 5 minutes. How your sense of time changes when you stop splitting your day into 1,000 tiny escapes. The silence becomes training, not therapy. Training for staying present when it is uncomfortable. Training for living without constant sedation. Training for being able to stand in your own life without needing to spike it with chaos just to feel your pulse. Clear sight does something cruel to memory. It makes it stop being a movie you can edit and turns it into footage you have to accept. And you will feel a wave of shame that is not dramatic. It is clinical. Like looking at an injury and realizing you kept walking on it for years and then acted surprised it never healed. You see the moments where you were not only harmed but complicit, not because you wanted pain, because you wanted familiarity, because you wanted to avoid the risk of a different life, because you wanted to be able to say you tried without ever risking the full attempt. That realization hurts because it strips you of innocence, and innocence was comfortable. Innocence let you blame without limit. Innocence let you say you had no choice. And the moment you lose innocence, you gain something colder and more useful: accountability. You start understanding that guilt is not a weapon meant to beat you into the ground. It is a directional signal. It points at the specific behavior that violates your own standards. And the only way guilt becomes poison is when you keep it as a feeling instead of turning it into correction. You stop doing the thing that makes you feel dirty. You stop returning to the environment that makes you small. You stop maintaining relationships that require you to lie about who you are. You stop using your past as a permission slip to repeat the same mistake. None of this feels heroic. It feels like cleanup, like scraping hardened residue off the inside of your life. And cleanup is not glamorous. It is tedious and honest, and it leaves your hands sore. And that soreness is the price of becoming someone you can stand next to in the quiet. You also stop demanding forgiveness from yourself as if forgiveness is a switch, because forgiveness is not the first step. It is the byproduct of consistency. And consistency only happens when you are willing to live with the discomfort of not being redeemed yet, while still behaving like the person you claim you want to be. You wanted motivation, like it was a gift somebody hands you, like a bright little spark you can carry around in your pocket. And that is adorable, in a sad way, because the real fuel you are going to run on is uglier. It is the silent disgust you feel when you catch yourself lying. The calm anger you feel when you recognize you are about to betray your own plan. The cold refusal that rises when you realize you have been selling your future for a cheap moment of relief. That
does not cheer you up. It does not make you feel loved. It does not make you feel inspired. It makes you feel cornered. And being cornered is exactly what forces change. Because when the exits are closed, you stop wandering and you start building. You build habits like barriers between you and your worst instincts. You build structure like a fence around your attention. You build boundaries like locks on doors you used to leave open for anyone to walk through. You learn to use your own cruelty correctly, not to punish yourself, but to cut off indulgence, to stop granting your weakness unlimited credit, to stop treating every urge like it deserves comfort. You become less sentimental about your feelings, and that is not coldness. It is maturity. It is you understanding that a feeling is real and still not in charge. You stop narrating your struggle because narration turns pain into entertainment, and you have entertained yourself for years to avoid evolving. The new you works in silence because silence does not need witnesses, and witnesses are distractions when you are trying to rebuild a mind that has been cracked by years of avoidance. You do not need to announce progress to make it valid. You do not need to explain your discipline to make it fair. You do not need to prove your suffering to make it count. You just do the work. You let the results speak in the only language that matters, the language of what you consistently become. And this is the last refinement, the part that turns endurance into strength with teeth, the part that makes silence feel like ownership. You stop trying to be understood as a way to feel safe, because needing to be understood keeps you dependent on other people's interpretation, and interpretation is unstable. And you finally accept that stability has to come from inside, from your alignment, from your private standards, from the way you act when nobody is there to reward you. You start speaking less because you stop using words to soothe your anxiety. And when you do speak, your words land heavier, not because they are louder, because they are rarer and they are true. You stop reacting quickly because quick reactions are usually fear wearing confidence. And you let time do what time does. You let impulses burn out. You let people reveal themselves. You let your own emotions settle into something you can actually trust. You become difficult to lure, difficult to rush, difficult to shame, because you no longer outsource your worth to the next conversation, the next compliment, the next criticism. You still feel pain, but it does not scatter you. It organizes you. It points you toward what you need to strengthen. It tells you where your boundaries are thin. It tells you where your discipline is sloppy. It tells you where you still crave rescue. And you correct without drama. You carry yourself with that quiet weight that makes other people uneasy because it reminds them of their own noise. And you do not fix their unease. You let them sit in it the way you learn to sit in yours.
You become the kind of person who can be alone without being lonely, who can be silent without being empty, who can endure without needing a story about it. And that is the darkest kind of strength, because it is not soft, it is not comforting, it is not asking for permission. It is simply there, steady. And the steady thing always wins in the end, because it keeps showing up after the loud things burn out. And all that remains, when the dust settles and the excuses die and the mind runs out of tricks, is the same quiet you started with, not as a threat, as a home, as silence. Silence stops being a shelter the second you realize it does not protect you from anything. It only removes the padding you use to wrap around consequences. And that is why it becomes useful. Because usefulness is the opposite of comfort. Comfort lets you float. Usefulness makes you heavy in the right places. It makes you sink into your own decisions, so you cannot pretend you were carried there by luck or pushed there by bad days. And you can feel that weight now when you wake up before the world makes noise, when the room is still and your first thought tries to slide into the old groove, the little automatic script that tells you to delay, to soften, to bargain, to keep everything vague so nothing can accuse you. And you cut it off without drama. Because the first victory in a quiet life is not a big change. It is denying your mind its favorite opening line. You have to understand this part with the kind of cold attention you usually reserve for other people's flaws. Because strength inside you is not a statue, it is a system. And systems collapse when maintenance feels optional. So now the silence becomes your inspection. It becomes the place where you check what you did yesterday against what you said you would do. Not to shame yourself, to keep reality tight, to keep the gap small. Because the gap is where denial grows back. You will feel the temptation to treat clarity like a finish line, to relax into a new identity and call that growth. But identity is the most seductive trap you own. Because once you wear a label, you start protecting the label instead of protecting the truth. And you already know how that ends. You already lived inside a label called fine, and it almost ate you. So the silence demands something sharper from you. It demands that you keep your promises in private, even when there is no emotional reward. It demands that you keep your standards when nobody is looking, and when nobody would ever find out if you slipped. And that is where the real pressure lands. Because this is not about being admired. This is about being able to sit alone with your mind and not feel that sour, hidden contempt that comes from knowing you are faking your own life. The quiet does not praise you for improvement. It measures you. And if you want to live with yourself, you let it measure you without flinching. You let it catch the small lies while they are still small. You let it strip the soft excuses before they harden into a new personality. Because you are not trying to become impressive. You are trying to become unbreakable in the ordinary way. The way that holds when nothing exciting is happening,
and the only witness is the air. There is a new kind of denial waiting for you right here. And it is uglier because it wears your progress like a mask. It shows up when you start using discipline as an excuse to avoid any softness at all. When you start treating every need like weakness. When you start confusing control with maturity. Because control looks clean. Control looks powerful. Control keeps you from ever having to admit you still want things that cannot be earned with effort. You will catch yourself wanting to become untouchable, not stable, untouchable. And that desire comes straight out of old hurt, straight out of the moments when you needed someone and learned that needing was dangerous. So you decided the safest version of you is the version with no open hands. And you will call that strength because it feels sharp. But it is only armored fear. Clarity does not require you to harden into stone. Clarity requires you to stop lying about what you feel while still refusing to be controlled by it. And those are different skills. And if you mix them up, you will build a new prison with prettier walls. You will start policing yourself the way you used to police your silence. You will start punishing your own humanity for showing up. You will start treating every emotion like a threat to your progress. And you will feel proud of that at first, because it looks like discipline. But it is just another form of avoidance. Avoidance of vulnerability. Avoidance of dependence. Avoidance of the simple fact that you are a human animal with needs that do not disappear just because you learned to endure. Real inner strength has room for discomfort without turning it into self-violence. It has room for tiredness without turning it into collapse. It has room for sadness without turning it into self-pity. And it has room for connection without turning it into worship. And that balance is hard because it forces you to accept a truth your ego hates. The truth that you can be strong and still need. You can be clear and still feel. You can be disciplined and still require rest and support and basic care. And accepting that truth does not make you soft. It makes you accurate. The pressure here is accuracy, because inaccurate strength becomes arrogance, and arrogance is denial with a louder posture. And you did not crawl through all that quiet just to replace one lie with a more respectable lie. When you stop running from yourself, you start noticing the damage you caused while you were running. Not only to you, to people who had to live around your coping mechanisms. You do not like that sentence, because it drags you out of the comfortable story where you were only a victim of your past. But a person can be hurt and still hurt others. And pretending otherwise is just self-protection disguised as innocence. You will remember the times you withdrew instead of speaking, and people paid for your silence with confusion. You will remember the times you acted indifferent to avoid being rejected, and that indifference taught someone else to stop trying. You will remember the times you said yes with your mouth and no with your actions, and that split made you unreliable, And you justified it because you were overwhelmed, because you were tired, because you had reasons, and your reasons were real, and still the impact landed. Clarity does not ask you to drown in guilt. Guilt is lazy when it becomes a swamp. It keeps you stuck because it feels like doing something while you do nothing. Clarity asks for repair, and repair is controlled suffering with a sharper edge. Because repair requires you to step into moments you avoided for years. Moments where you admit a plain fact without dressing it up. Where you take responsibility without demanding forgiveness. Where you offer correction without expecting applause. This is where your endurance becomes adult. Because childish endurance is just taking hits and calling it fate. Adult endurance is absorbing the discomfort of accountability and still moving forward. You will choose one relationship where you have been hiding behind distance, and you will bring a single, honest statement into it. Not a speech, not a performance. One honest statement that removes confusion. And you will let the response be whatever it is, because you are not doing it to be liked. You are doing it to align. You will choose one habit where you have been stealing time from your own goals, and you will cut off the access point cleanly. Not with a dramatic declaration, with action that makes it inconvenient to relapse. You will choose one promise you keep breaking to yourself, and you will reduce it to a simple, executable behavior that cannot be argued with. Because your mind loves complexity when it wants to avoid. And you will starve that complexity by making the next step small enough to do and heavy enough to matter. Repair is not mercy, it is engineering. It is you rebuilding the parts of your life that warped under the heat of denial. And it hurts because it forces you to admit you were not just surviving, you were shaping outcomes. And that admission is the point. Because only a person who admits they shape outcomes can start shaping them on purpose.
The silence also changes what you crave in people. And that will feel like a loss even when it is a correction. You will stop being entertained by the familiar chaos. You will stop feeling chemistry with the same kind of instability that used to light you up, because that spark was your nervous system recognizing danger as home. And it took you a long time to understand that home can be a bad neighborhood. You will start noticing how certain conversations leave you drained in a specific way, not tired, contaminated. Like you handed over your attention and got nothing back but noise. And you will begin to protect your attention like it is a resource, because it is. It is the only place your life actually happens. You will stop oversharing to buy closeness. You will stop performing competence to avoid intimacy. You will stop using humor as a shield every time something gets real, because those moves belong to the old you, who needed constant control of how you were perceived. Now you will build connection the hard way, through consistency, through saying what you mean and doing what you said, through being present without trying to be impressive. And that kind of connection is quieter. And quiet connection feels empty at first to someone who learned affection through intensity. You will miss the rush. You will miss the dramatic makeups and the sharp highs, not because they were good, because they were loud enough to drown your internal doubt. And now you have to live without that drowning. You have to live with a steadier kind of closeness that forces you to show up as you are,
which is terrifying when you have spent years curating a version of you that cannot be rejected. The pressure here is exposure without performance, being seen without controlling the angle, letting someone witness your process without turning it into a story. And that is controlled suffering too, because it requires you to tolerate the discomfort of not being able to guarantee the outcome. You will learn to hold your boundaries without turning them into walls. You will learn to listen without immediately defending. You will learn to receive kindness without turning it into a debt you have to repay with self-erasure. And each of those skills makes your life less chaotic and also less intoxicating, which is exactly why they work, because addiction loves intoxication and growth loves stability. And stability is boring until you realize boring is what peace feels like when you were raised on emergency. Now the last trap is pride and suffering. The subtle pride that whispers, you earned your clarity through pain, so you deserve to be hard forever. And that pride is another way of staying stuck, because it keeps you loyal to the wound, as if the wound is your origin story. You do not need to keep bleeding to prove you healed. You do not need to keep a bruise visible to justify your discipline. You do not need to stay sharp all the time to feel safe. The strongest people do not stay sharp, they stay ready. And readiness looks calm, not tense. It looks ordinary, not dramatic. It looks like you can take a hit without turning it into a catastrophe, because you built internal spacing. You built the ability to pause between stimulus and response. You built the ability to let a feeling exist without turning it into a decision. That ability is what the silence has been training in you from the beginning, because silence is the pause made physical. And you used to fear pauses because pauses gave your truth time to speak. And now you rely on them because pauses give your strength time to choose. You will notice it in small moments. Someone tries to bait you and you do not bite. A setback lands and you do not collapse into old narratives. An uncomfortable task waits and you do not delay it until it grows teeth. You step toward it with that quiet, unpleasant honesty that says, this is mine to handle. You will also notice the deeper change, the one that makes your mind feel less like a hostile room, because the internal critic loses power when you stop arguing with it and start outworking it, when you stop pleading for self-worth and start building it through consistent alignment. And when the critic speaks now, it has to speak in a lower voice, because there is evidence against it. Evidence in your behavior, evidence in your endurance, evidence in the way you keep showing up, even when you feel nothing and nobody is watching. That evidence does not make you happy, it makes you anchored. And anchored is what survives storms. Anchored is what does not need constant reassurance. Anchored is what can hold pain without turning it into identity. So the silence becomes your weapon and your refuge at the same time. Not a weapon pointed outward, a weapon against the part of you that always wanted to escape responsibility. The part of you that wanted to be rescued by a mood or a person or a lucky break. You do not get rescued, you get built. And being built is slow and unromantic and relentless. And it will offend the part of you that still wants special treatment for suffering, because special treatment keeps you soft. It keeps you waiting. It keeps you entitled to delay. Clarity strips entitlement. It leaves you with a simple rule that your body will learn before your ego accepts it. The rule that you become what you repeatedly choose in private. You have chosen avoidance in private for years, and it turned into a life that felt loud and empty. And now you choose endurance in private, and it turns into a life that feels quiet and solid. And solid is not glamorous. Solid is not a story. Solid is just what remains when your excuses finally get tired and fall apart. That is the point of all this pressure. Not to make you feel good, to make you real. And real is heavy. Real is accountable. Real is steady. And real can hold pain without worshiping it. You will still have days where the old urge comes back. Days where your mind tries to sell you noise. Days where your chest tightens and your hands reach for distraction like muscle memory. And those days will not be a sign you failed. They will be the periodic tests that prove the structure holds. And you will pass them the way you pass everything now, without applause, without speeches, by staying present, by taking the next correct step, by letting the quiet return after the impulse burns out. And when the impulse fades, you will hear that clean space again, that stillness you used to fear. And you will recognize it not as emptiness, not as punishment, but as the place where you can hear yourself clearly enough to obey what you know is right. And that is not comfort, it is command. And command is what you came for, even if you did not know it. Because the loud world will always try to rent space in your head. And you finally learned how to keep your door closed without barricading your heart. How to be quiet without being numb. How to endure without becoming cruel. How to stand in the stillness and let it sharpen you into the only thing that can live through anything without losing itself. Silence. You ever seen someone get torn to shreds, piece by piece, while the world just watches? No rescue, no warning, no, are you okay? Just silence. You kept giving, didn't you? You gave them time, energy, loyalty, your freaking soul, and they turned around and acted like you were never even there. Funny how people beg for your light, but curse you when you stop shining. You kept showing up for them, thinking they'd do the same when your world burned. But no, they were holding the damn matches. And now you're in ruins, left with the ashes of the person you used to be. But here's the joke that nobody sees coming. God isn't finished with you, not even close. Because the very same people who watched you fall, they're gonna watch something else now. They're gonna watch you rise. Not quietly, not timidly. You're gonna rise like thunder. And it'll shake their little fantasy world apart. You see, they thought breaking you meant erasing you. That's where they messed up. Pain doesn't delete real ones. It just rebuilds them different. You don't go back to who you were. No, that version of you died in the fire. God's about to raise you from that wreckage. Not patched up, but transformed. Stronger, colder, sharper. Not bitter, just done explaining. Done begging. Done shrinking yourself to fit in rooms you were meant to own. They laughed at you when you were on your knees. They mocked your silence like it meant defeat. But silence ain't weakness, kid. It's the sound of God working. It's the sound of something terrifying building in the shadows. See, real transformation don't happen in applause. It happens in isolation, in pain, in betrayal. That's where warriors are born. And you're not broken. You're in construction. You think God ain't watching all this? You think he didn't hear those conversations behind your back? You think he didn't see who switched up when the pressure came? Don't play yourself. He saw every smirk when they thought you'd never come back. He heard every lie they told to paint you as the villain in their coward little stories. And you know what he's gonna do? He's gonna rebuild you in front of their damn faces. He's not hiding the comeback. He's preparing the stage. You're not being punished. You're being positioned. Let that sink in. This ain't karma. It's correction. It's redirection. God's about to make sure they choke on every word they spoke when you were at your lowest. You kept quiet, didn't you? Didn't defend yourself, didn't fight their rumors. You just kept moving, kept surviving, and it hurt like hell. But that silence was divine. That silence was sacred. That silence gave God space to work. Because when you fight your own battles, you might win. But when you let him fight for you, oh, it's a massacre. You wanted revenge. I get it. But sometimes, the best revenge is watching God handle what you couldn't. Sometimes, the people who try to bury you will water the soil you rise from. The same hands that threw dirt on your name, they're about to witness what happens when God decides it's time. And it's time, not because they're sorry,
Not because you need to prove something, but because you've suffered long enough. Don't think you're weak because you cried.